Hello everyone, welcome into another stream. Hope you're doing well. SinclairLore, nice to have you again. Spencer Harmon, nice to see you. Second. So, yesterday we watched actually a lot of videos on the stream. I don't remember because there were so many. We watched 3 by Cosmos, The Secret of Stormvale, Melina and the Glowmai, Unveiling the Glowmide Queen. Then we watched, not actually this video, it was the other Glowmide Queen video by the Ashen Hollow, and then Hawkshaw's video on the Killer Women of Dominula, following that up with beating Elden Ring in Every Demigod, but as Malekith by Amazing Chest, which was really fun and interesting, and The Killer Who Got Away by Nat is Cool, which was about Irina's murder and the possible murder suspects, which was a really fun little video. So today, we will look at a couple videos, mostly about Elden Ring and Dark Souls. So the first video I have queued up for tonight is Why Are We Obsessed with the Lore of Dark Souls and Elden Ring by FatBrett. Then we have SinclairLore's video Manus, Father of the Abyss with AesirAesthetics. And to close out the night, we'll probably just finish up with the award-winning My Dark Souls Story, Biography of the Chosen Undead, the Dark Souls story told to us by Nerdy Incorporated. So this video is the one that we were wondering about, like who won that $10,000 prize that like summarized the story of Dark Souls. And I guess this is the winner. I have no idea what's actually in it, and I'm very curious to see what it said so succinctly to get that first place prize. So Conscom, welcome in. Chubby Owl, it's been a minute. Nice to see you again. Zyveltius, welcome in. Nice to have you again. And Without Horns and Earthmind, nice to see all of you again. Yeah, we are going to be talking about the Abyss Daddy. Alright, so the first video for tonight is Why Are We Obsessed with the Lore of Dark Souls and Elden Ring by FatBrett. Let's go ahead and dive on in.
I am obsessed with the lore of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring in a way I've never been with any other series of games.
My condolences.
I have probably spent hundreds of hours watching videos that dissect and analyze and theorize about so many tiny little details in these games, reading forums and discussions, pouring through dozens of different fan theories. And I have spent hundreds of hours playing and replaying these games, rereading all the item descriptions, listening to all the dialogue. Spent so much time thinking about the games and their stories even when I'm not playing them. I actually find these games to often be really frustrating to play. Like, some of these boss fights can just go screw themselves. But the world design and stories and characters are so
you gotta appreciate that it's the Capra Demon fight with the dogs. Doing the pro strat of running up the stairs to kite the demon. And then you should, like, jump down and get the dogs if you didn't kill them. Well, I guess it's too late. He was already at 0 health. Yeah, them's the break sometimes. So yeah, this video is kind of recommended in the Discord. It had an interesting title, and I think I saw it pop up. Didn't this just come out, like, super recently? 4 days ago, yeah. So this seems like a cool video to go into. So, yeah, if you guys do have more videos, make sure to let me know either in the video comments or the Discord itself. That'll help. Of course, it's Capra. Yeah. You were going to watch it by yourself, but you're glad to watch it with us? Sweet. Nice to have you. Hey, Ask Next, you're on the wrong video. So maybe I did a bit of an oopsie by, like, scheduling all the lives in advance. So, yeah. Was that your issue, Astanex, that you went on like either tomorrow or Thursday's schedule? Hey, Crunchy, welcome into the stream. I was enjoying your stream earlier. I was trying to play a little bit of catch up after like I finished dinner, so I was watching at 2 times speed. But yeah, if you do need some more help with like your streaming setup, let me know and I'll be willing to do what I can. But yeah, welcome back.
Fascinating that no matter how frustrated I get with the gameplay, I keep playing. I can't stop playing until I've not only seen everything in the game, but until I've seen it all like a dozen times. I've never been this obsessed with the story of any other video game. No other game's story has ever hooked me in quite the same way. And I know I'm not alone. There are millions of people who are just as obsessed, if not more obsessed than I am with the lore of these games. There are people who have made entire
I don't know what he's talking about. Nobody else is like this.
careers out of just talking about the lore of From Software games. That's crazy. That shouldn't be possible. There is something about the way the stories in these games are presented, something about the characters, the themes, the ideas, that is so compelling, so fascinating, that an entire cottage industry has arisen on the internet to dissect and discuss them. And it's something that is not easy to imitate. I've played a lot of games that are obviously trying to mimic the storytelling of Dark Souls, that try to tell stories that are esoteric and obscure and bleak, but just completely miss the mark, don't come anywhere close to getting their audiences as engaged as Dark Souls does. I've spent a
Yeah, I think he's kind of right and also kind of wrong. Well, I don't exactly speak for him because I don't know what else he's played and what he's comparing this to. So to just speak a little bit more generally here, I do think certain developers tried to emulate the Dark Souls style without kind of truly understanding why it worked as well as it did. And I think first and foremost, Miyazaki and From Software are just absolute masters at crafting a world that feels lived and breathed in to a certain extent. Obviously, it's a little bit suspect that there's no toilets anywhere, but putting away some of those gameplay concessions, I do think that the worlds are the primary characters in these games, in that you never feel as though it's truly your world. You just kind of feel like you're passing through it, and this kind of lack of an invitation to stay is very fascinating, I think, on a bit of a meta level, and I think it kind of draws people in to want to know more organically. And because they want to know more, because the worlds are so captivating, that's kind of when they really delve into the lore. But to tie this back into other games, I don't think they really understand the world building that goes into some of these FromSoft games. To me, the pinnacle of world building, and probably almost any video game, is literally just the intro of Dark Souls 1. It's dark, it's direct, and it doesn't tell you a damn thing. So it just really piques that curiosity, and you're either on board or you're not. And maybe it'll click for you along the way, but I think that's just one thing that FromSoft does that's head and shoulders better than a lot of other devs. So cryptic lore doesn't necessarily make a game a better game or make it more engaging, but I do think there were games that came out well before the Dark Souls trilogy, and even Demon Souls, obviously, that had what I would say is Dark Souls-esque style lore storytelling. And the primary example, I guess pun intended now that I think about it, for me would be Metroid Prime, where you're Samus Aran and you're just kind of going around in these alien worlds. They don't really tell you why. It's always been really bare bones, but at least in Metroid Prime, there was a lot more lore contained within the notes left throughout the world, so you could get a better understanding of what was going on and piecing it together. Setting that aside, I honestly think in some ways Final Fantasy VII, the original, is very similar to the way that Dark Souls and these games present their stories in a kind of non-linear, you have to figure it out as you go along. The more you delve into it, the more you get out of it, kind of thing. And I think that's probably one reason why I've always been interested in the lore of these games, because I was really interested in the lore of games like Metroid Prime and Final Fantasy VII. And even moving beyond games, you could even look at more examples from literature and film. I think in some ways Evangelion is kind of similar, where the storytelling is not very direct, and it just tells you episodic things that kind of tie into each other a little bit, and they connect much more directly later on. And I feel that's kind of something similar in the presentation of all these forms of art. There is the poop bucket in the cell in DS1. Oh, he got me. And there is all the poop in the Cathedral of the Deep with the non-flushing toilets where the giants are. Yeah, and now Fallout is another one that I was going to mention. Yeah, I think Fallout does do a better job in presenting what I would say the narrative, the main story of the game, but it certainly does have a ridiculous amount of environmental lore storytelling through all of its terminals and stuff like that. Hey, Beans and Rice, welcome back to the stream. All right.
A lot of time thinking about this question. What is it about the lore of Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Elden Ring that makes us so obsessed with them? What do these stories have that all those imitators don't? And I think I've finally actually come up with an answer. I've narrowed it down to 5 specific elements in the world design. The first element of world design I want to discuss is what I'm calling layered history. Okay, so in Dark Souls, one of the first areas you'll explore is called the Undead Burg, and from there you'll ascend to the Undead Parish, and there you'll find this huge church. And there's a lot of really interesting things going on here with the world design that I'll talk about more later in the essay, but for now I just want to focus on how old this place feels. The Undead Burg and Undead Parish feel ancient to me. It feels like not only was this place constructed a really long time ago, but that society collapsed here a really long time ago. You do encounter some bits and pieces of the life that once thrived here. It's actually a very domestic setting in some ways. You will explore what look like ordinary homes and markets, but the people who once lived here are all long gone. In the present, this settlement is a haunted place inhabited only by hollowed minds.
So how did that hollow get there behind all the furniture? Did he put the plates back? No, but in all seriousness, I do kind of agree with the whole idea of layered storytelling. And I think it's very interesting when you look at like the architecture of these kind of games, because as you mentioned, like Undead Burg and like the Undead Parish and whatnot are their own kind of things. And then like this chapel here is a little bit less dilapidated. Well, not this chapel, obviously, like with this image, but earlier that he showed off. It's a little bit less dilapidated, but still kind of like forsaken nonetheless. But when you compare that to Firelink Shrine, which feels even more ancient, you really get the sense of you're not getting the full story even when you're like living in it. If that makes sense, which I didn't really explain super well. You either get it or you don't. Spencer asks, is it layered history just history with extra steps? A little bit, but just to answer that probably rhetorical question a bit more seriously, it's that you can get a deeper understanding of an area by like the layers of it. So I'm trying to think, okay, so in Elden Ring, we have a bunch of churches of America, which, you know, seem like they're churches of America. However, when we go into places like the Cathedral and the Church of Dragon Communion, we see a bunch of dragon type imagery, draconic imagery within these churches that have the same base architecture as the churches of America, which to me calls into question the origin of the churches of America. Were these churches built before America and Godfrey's campaign, and were they appropriated by America and Godfrey? I do think so, and I think it might also be telling that none of those churches actually have like stone flooring, so they do seem significantly more aged than places like Lanedell or Stormvale. Yeah, even just different architectural styles for different places to convey the history. Yeah, and as we were watching on one of the videos, like the past couple days, they made the point of talking about the interview that Miyazaki and the other game devs did, which I don't remember which interview it was, where they talked about in Sen's Fortress, they actually went through and like rounded the steps where the iron balls were falling, which I think is also a kind of form of layered history, even if that history is being a little bit flattened in active time.
Mindless guards who are guarding nothing but ruins, and by warriors and adventurers whose journeys ended in pitiful failure, perhaps hundreds of years ago, yet their animated corpses continue to stalk the setting of their failure. When you explore here, you already get a sense that you're exploring ancient history. But from this big church, if you cross this walkway, you'll end up in a much smaller and much more ruined church. This is an even older church than the already ancient one we explored before.
Exactly.
There is a story here. Once upon a time, this settlement grew too big and too prosperous for this cramped little church.
Oh yeah, and like another thing that kind of reminds me of Elden Ring is how when you go to Lanedell through like the Eastern Rampart, as it's called, you will have like the kind of divine tower bridge, which has a bit of different masonry on it that leads directly into the ramparts, which I think also plays into the kind of environmental storytelling that From Software does. And when you compare the buildings of Lanedell itself to the fortified manor, They're both completely different in terms of their architecture, but the fortified manor is also like directly charred, which is I think a big tell is as far as like the history contained, the layered history contained within these kind of games. Hey Necropolis and Jay Dixon, welcome back to the stream.
The people built that larger and more magnificent new church, and then abandoned this one. This is a new layer of history that we've uncovered. Just like in real life, this land of Lordran is a place of deep history. Monuments constructed on top of other monuments, old stories written on the backs of even older stories. But it doesn't stop there. If you descend from the old church, you'll end up in this shadowy forest called the Dark Root Garden, and here you'll find even older ruins. These ruins are so old that there is nothing left of them except their crumbling foundations. These are so ruined and so decayed that you can't even tell what these buildings once were. If you explore really thoroughly, you'll even be able to rescue this time-traveling maiden from a crystal golem. This is Dusk, and she hails from a long-forgotten age, from a kingdom that was called Ulasil, where magic utterly unlike the magic of the present once flourished. In her dialogue, you can get a glimpse of lost knowledge, forgotten ideas, a culture whose influence vanished from the world hundreds of years ago. The setting of Dark Souls, this land of the ancient lords, is a setting with a deep and layered history. You get this sense that with the passing of the ages, many different kingdoms and cultures have come and gone here,
and this is part of the reason why I do treat so much of the NPC dialogue with skepticism. Not because I disbelieve what the NPCs are saying in terms of like, I don't think they're lying to me. I just tend to believe that they don't have the full story of what's going on, because even before we wind up where we do, we do have these kind of senses of different ages that have already passed beyond the ones that we're aware of. So that's part of why I'm like skeptical about them in general, just because like there's so much in these games that lead me to believe that no one individual has like the complete picture of things. So yeah.
And fallen and been forgotten here. If you go deep enough, you can actually go all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to the Age of Ancients, the origins of this world before the rise of any kingdoms, before the rise of anything at all. Down, down, down in Ash Lake, the deepest part of the map, you can catch a glimpse of what this world looked like at the beginning. This is something that I absolutely love about exploring the world of Dark Souls. I love delving deeper and deeper and deeper into history, and you're always rewarded for going deeper. You'll always find something even more mysterious, more incredible. And this isn't unique to Dark Souls. All of the From Software Souls and Souls adjacent games do this. For example, you can find the exact same layering of history in Bloodborne. At the start of Bloodborne, you'll explore Central Yharnam, the urban center of this strange Victorian-inspired city, a place gripped by a fanatic religion which worships blood and dark gods, a place which is currently in its death throes, overcome by a plague which transforms humans into beastly monsters. Yharnam is a cramped city of twisting streets and dark alleys and misty graveyards, where hundreds of cathedral spires compete for space in a cluttered and choked skyline. Yharnam is my absolute favorite setting in any From Software game. I love this place. As you explore, you can discover a hidden...
So this already seems like it's an S tier video, but welcome back to the stream, Ponyboy, and nice to see you, Kala. Welcome in.
Path leading down below Central Yharnam, and here you'll enter a place called Old Yharnam, an older district of the city constructed down in a river valley. The architecture here is much simpler and cruder and blockier than the incredibly ornate architecture up above.
And kind of one of the ironic things to me about Old Yharnam is, based on some of the dev interviews, if I remember correctly, Old Yharnam is like one of the last areas that they added into the game. So it's just kind of even funnier that it has like the quote-unquote older architecture, relatively speaking here.
Old Yharnam was built in a poorer time, and perhaps a time before the city was gripped by its current blood-obsessed religion. But Old Yharnam was once overwhelmed by the same beast plague that is now ravaging Central Yharnam. This district was burned to stop the plague, and both beastly and still human residents were burned along with it. It is an abandoned place where only beasts now dwell, long forgotten by the rest of the city. And you can go even deeper than this. Old Yharnam was built atop the site of a vast underground labyrinth, tombs and caverns, an entire ancient underground city carved out by the Thumerians, a race of pale superhumans, guardians and caretakers of sleeping gods. And even the labyrinth has layers of history of its own. The earliest Thumerians were mere humble guardians, but later generations built entire grand kingdoms beneath the earth, with a nobility and aristocracy, and their queens intermarried with restless gods. Just like Dark Souls, Bloodborne's setting has these layers of history that keep going down and down, seemingly without end. More and more ancient, stranger and stranger, each layer more mysterious than the one above. Elden Ring has some of this too. Elden Ring is set in a kingdom called the Lands Between. In the present, the Lands Between are dominated by the God Queen Marika and the Golden Order she founded. But everywhere you look, you can find evidence of older, previous orders that once dominated this place, of a chaotic primordial crucible and dragon gods, of sorceress astrologers who once read the future and the movements of the stars, and of the Nox, a condemned people who conspired against the gods themselves, and of the gruesome godskin apostles who worshipped a figure known as the Gloam-Eyed Queen. There is so much history in the Lands Between that is way older than the already very old history of Queen Marika in the Golden Order. But most of it is so ancient and so forgotten that all you can find are these tantalizing little bits and pieces, hints of a much larger story. This is something that a lot...
Which is why we spend hours upon hours quibbling over the minor details of what existed when in the timeline. Feels bad, man.
A lot of Dark Souls imitators are missing. They'll have ancient settings full of ruins, but you'll only ever get to uncover that one surface layer of history. And maybe it is a compelling history, but it can never be as fascinating as the deep history of the Souls games. Never as fascinating as getting to peel back layer after layer of history, delving all the way down to the origin of the world, the births of the gods, passing lost kingdoms and forgotten cultures on your descent.
Yeah, and I do think this is kind of a very overlooked aspect of environmental storytelling with a lot of games. And as I was mentioning on like one of the streams fairly recently, like one of the like coolest parts of like old school gaming and like Metroidvanias to me comes from Super Metroid, when you get into the area where Samus actually like encounters the larval Metroid that she saves in Metroid 2, because that was a Game Boy game. But anyway, I'm trying to think of Samus finds Metroid. Let's pull this up real quick. So I don't think this will be it. So as you get to this area down here, you're going to find like a bunch more like dust type stuff. And there's just like a little bit of environmental lore here that the reason things are like petrified is because of the Metroid. So you have like the Chozo like collapsing into dust. And this is it's like Super Nintendo 16-bit era gaming, where the devs are like paying attention to the storytelling in a game that virtually literally has no story. So we get a random monster coming in. Holy crap! Now we actually see it turn into dust, and then the Metroid chases us. We're literally helpless as this terrifying creature attacks us. And then it stops when we're at 1 HP. It chirps because it recognizes us. Because this is the Metroid larva that we saved in Metroid 2. So yeah, that's a pretty good example to me of like environmental lore storytelling in a game that came out like a decade, maybe, yeah, like over a decade probably before Dark Souls 1 came out. So it's really important. And I do agree with what FatBrett is saying here, where like a lot of games just kind of like take it to a surface level, unfortunately. The Choso in general, oh my god. You remember that moment as a kid? That'll stay with you for decades? Yeah, and it's like, look at how little that they had to work with, but they just crafted a story based off of like, 5 assets that just kind of like layered on top of each other. 1994, yeah. Choppy the Beast, welcome in. It was said that playing Dark Souls and Bloodborne often feels like examining a crime scene. You've often thought it felt like being an archaeologist in a world where myths are real. Yeah, it definitely feels like that as well. You're like, the beast here is eating the humans. But wait a second, these aren't humans because their left arms are longer. They're half transformed themselves. The real culprit, I mean, actually, it's kind of funny because we did watch like a murder mystery lore video last night on stream. Have I ever seen Terminal Montage's animated cartoon, There's Something About Super Metroid? No, I don't think I have. Maybe I'll add it to the list.
Settings of Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Elden Ring feel so old. Their histories are so complicated and layered and mysterious. You're not just unraveling one thread of history, you're unraveling age upon age upon age of historical threads, built on top of each other, inspiring and influencing each other. But what is even more important than those layers is the fact that we, the player, uncover those layers ourselves. That is another essential element of the world building in these games. In Souls, instead of just being told the history of the setting, you have to go out and find it. A lot of fantasy RPG series do have settings with long and complicated histories. Elder Scrolls, The Witcher, Baldur's Gate, all of these series have kingdoms that have risen and fallen, champions that have been transformed into mythological heroes by the passing of the ages, world-shattering wars whose scars form the bedrock of new thriving civilizations. All of these series and many others have really cool lore, but it has never hooked me in quite the same way that Dark Souls has. And a lot of
yeah, and I think thinking back to Skyrim, they're all like all of the settings are just very, I don't want to say self-contained because I say that all the time, but it's like they're all purpose made for what they are. So like a village is always a village, has always been a village essentially. There's no really like architectural stuff that goes along to suggest that it could have been more, like things changed over time, whereas that kind of storytelling is a lot more common in the FromSoft games. So for example, going back to the Leyndell thing, we have the fortified manor which has been burned, but it's like next to a rampart that's like keeping the rest of Leyndell out of it, which is, not that big a deal. But all of the other buildings are kind of, well, relatively speaking, brand new. The upper portion of Leyndell has more gilded decorations on top of its roofs and things like that, whereas Lower Leyndell is a bit more like poorer in nature, maybe a little older, but a lot of these buildings still have like the kind of a Sullian or Ordina / Nox design. So there is a lot, there's like a story within a story that's present in these games, as FatBrett has been saying. Like there's a lot more layers here than in games like Skyrim. And I haven't actually played through The Witcher, so I can't like talk about that too much. But at least the books, they did give a bit more of a sense of history. But even, I suppose that is a little bit more direct than FromSoft games. And I think one reason why FromSoft is successful is because the more you delve into it, the more you get out of it. And they do kind of subvert those expectations once you get over that kind of like initial hurdle of when you first dive into it. And I think like Koth is probably like one of the most important storytelling devices in like modern video gaming, to be honest. Elder Scrolls is just very bland, maybe. And welcome to the stream, Zychik. Crunchy's always felt the Souls games weren't designed for you, like you just happen to be there. That makes it feel real. Exactly. That's what I was trying to say earlier in the stream, but you said it pretty much exactly like I wanted to. One of your favorite things about the layers of history is the clothing in Bloodborne. Oh yeah, the clothing in Bloodborne's fantastic. Going from scholars at one end to the choir at the other. Yeah. And Sinclair agrees. It feels like you're a guest in a Soulsborne game. Yeah.
Other fantasy RPGs, the history of the setting will be told to you in a very direct and straightforward manner. A lot of it will come through extensive dialogue with other characters. Characters will tell you absolutely everything they know about the history of their worlds. These games will have literally hundreds of pages worth of dialogue, and a lot of that will be made up of characters talking about the history of their kingdoms, of their heroes, of their cultures, of their religious beliefs, just telling you everything you could ever want to know about the lore of their respective games. But as cool as these stories can be, I don't think a story told this way, through pages and pages of explicit exposition, can ever be as compelling as a story told the way From Software's games do, through player-controlled discovery. In Bloodborne, when you take your first steps out into the twisted city of Yharnam, you will know absolutely nothing about this setting or its history. You will wander around, lost and confused. Slowly, you will begin to understand the setting through its visual design, through little snippets of dialogue from characters who never tell you everything they know, from item descriptions that reveal small pieces of culture and history. Eventually, you will find the path down to Old Yharnam completely on your own. No one will tell you where this entrance is. No one will ever tell you the history of this older, burned, and forgotten district of the city. You have to put the pieces together on your own. You have to examine the simpler architecture here and realize, oh, this is simpler and cruder because it is older. You have to find a note that mentions the burning of Old Yharnam. You have to find hidden items and read hints in their descriptions. And then you have to descend down into the underground labyrinth, figure out for yourself what its connection to the city above is.
So yeah, as Astinex says in the chat, that FromSoft has attention to details, like the metal on the right leg. Where in Bloodborne does the Beast's Plague sneak up on? The right leg. And the metal is toward it. And all of that's not even mentioned in that armor. Yeah. So I think that's another thing that really attracts me to FromSoft's games, is that this kind of attention to detail is also supplemented by... how do I want to say it? Like, the attention to detail is supplemented by like a kind of forced perspective of the characters in that world. So to say that in a way that might make a bit more sense directly is that in some of these item descriptions, we're given the kind of opinions or beliefs of these characters in the game. So I think the more you play through Bloodborne and delve into its lore, you realize like the whole like beasthood creeping up the right leg thing is kind of a red herring. Obviously, you do inject the blood into your right leg whenever you use a blood vial, but beasthood is kind of its own thing. So there is a little bit of a correlation there, but correlation does not necessarily imply causation. And so this belief here is no more than a superstition. But even though it's a superstition, the people in this world believe or believed it at one time, which I think is way more realistic than most other games in their kind of storytelling. It's very rare where you get a kind of intersection of truth, lies, prejudice, belief, and like misinformation. Another game which kind of comes to mind, which rides that line pretty well, honestly, is kind of like Final Fantasy X, which spoiler alert, there's a church, they did some bad stuff and they're covering things up because it benefits them to do so. And so they've got the populace to believe in their teachings, but their teachings are just kind of self-serving in many ways. And so one of the main characters in Final Fantasy X has to come to grips with his own religion and the people who control it and his mission moving forward with the party as they become more in conflict with the status quo and the way things are in that world. All it takes is a belief in something, regardless of fact, for it to hold power. Are you a big fan of Persona by any chance, Zaveltius? The world is self-consistent. People believe something and then act on that belief. True. You thought the Nightbot called for a poutine check earlier? Maybe that's why people think I'm a Canadian. Zaveltia says, it's what makes organized religion so dangerous, and we see that quite a bit in FromSoft religions. You never played Persona? Okay. That actually becomes a really big, important thing in... I'm trying to remember if it first comes up in the second one or the third one, but yeah, that's something that does become a kind of focal point as the series goes on. So I was just curious. All right, going back to the video.
The layers of history here link together. There is no character or history book that will just straight up tell you, okay, in the beginning there were these powerful godlike beings who ascended into a dream world, leaving their bodies behind down in this labyrinth tomb, and they also left behind these guardians called Pthumerians to watch over their sleeping bodies in the tombs. Then over the course of time, those Pthumerians developed their own culture and nobility and society, but they screwed things up when their last queen porked a dark god named Odin, and her freaky godchild miscarried, but also lived on in some kind of crazy undead god way, unable to control its own undead powers, screwing everything up. And then some of the Pthumerians fled above ground, where they intermarried with some humans up there, founded the Cainhurst royal bloodline, ruled over this land as feudal lords for a while, built up Old Yarnum in the river valley. Then some scholars at the nearby Bergenworth College rediscovered the underground labyrinth tomb. They explored, unearthed the ancient Pthumerian practice of blood healing. One of them, Lawrence, shared this practice around. Then he himself transformed into a monster, then was beheaded. And then a new healing church was founded in his name.
And then obviously, like, a lot of this stuff is arguable here.
Etc., etc. The layers of history build on top of each other, on and on and on, up and up and up. In any other fantasy RPG, those things would just be told to you, but not in a Souls game. Another really smart thing that the Souls games do is attach a lot of the story to item descriptions. Every single item description in the game will include at least one small detail about the setting's history or some character's story. This way, players aren't just searching for new items, but are also very literally searching for the lore. The more thoroughly you explore, the more details of the story you are rewarded with. If you're someone who is obsessed with the lore of these games, it's a really strong incentive to keep playing, to search every nook and cranny, to go places and try things you wouldn't otherwise. For me, the most fun part of the gameplay of this series isn't the action or the boss battles. It's getting to feel like I'm an explorer, a treasure hunter, even a sort of archaeologist, uncovering the ancient history of all these incredible places. When you uncover enough details, you can begin to identify each of those layers of history, understand the major events, figure out how they connect to each other. This requires analysis, interpretation, even imagination. You have to be somewhat creative in the ways you fill in the holes, because there are so many holes. The Souls games never provide you with the complete picture. Even if you find every line of dialogue, every item description, examine every visual detail in the environment, you still will not have a complete picture of the story. There are missing.
All right, I'm depressed. Let's go on to the next video. No, but in all seriousness, it is a little bit overwhelming at times. Just how much more you learn reveals how little you learn, which is kind of true in all forms of academia, really. But it's just kind of ironic that you get that experience playing a video game, which video games have long had that kind of stigma of being kind of like the equivalent of mental or like junk food for the mind, where they're just kind of like entertaining, but filled with empty calories. Tony Pepperoni, welcome back in. And Bella, I think this is your first time talking tonight. Nice to see you again. So Chompy says, parsing stories in games in general is complicated, even more by cut and alpha content, which we have access to. Unlike books and movies, we have to decide what is still relevant and what isn't. Yeah, so that's kind of true. Like, every once in a while, you will be able to get an author's like early draft manuscript of a piece of work that they may have done. I think like Jack Kerouac is really famous as an example with his scroll version of On the Road, which like hardly has any punctuation and no paragraph breaks whatsoever, or like line breaks. So anyway, yeah, every once in a while you can get that, but you are right that there is that extra layer to FromSoft games when we look at cut content, as well as like dev interviews, which is kind of a a little bit infuriating to me. I do wish it was more contained within the games directly.
Pieces. Some of those missing pieces can be filled in by making educated guesses based on the pieces we do have. Like, no one in Bloodborne ever actually says why the Pthumerian civilization collapsed, but we do know that in some kind of crazy ritual, they gave birth to a destructive, undead, miscarried infant god, so hey, that seems like a definite possible culprit. I can put those two pieces together on my own. But the really crazy thing about the Souls games is that some of those missing pieces, even a lot of those missing pieces, are completely and totally unknowable. Fans can theorize, we can make guesses, but we'll never actually know. And that's
No, the DLC will fix it. Just wait.
It's not a mistake, that's by design. This is another one of those brilliant elements of world design that set the Souls lore apart from all other games. Unknowability. Now, a lot of people are frustrated by unknowability in fiction. Questions that are not only never answered by the author, but questions that the author intentionally crafted to be impossible to answer. It's like if you read a murder mystery and when you got to the end of the book, the author never revealed who the murderer was. A lot of audiences...
There's this really cool Korean movie, Salim의 추억. What's it called in English? Is it Memories of Murder? Memory of Murder? Something like that. Where you kind of have this situation where this detective is going through this relatively small town and trying to find out who this serial killer is. And I think I kind of already inadvertently spoiled the movie with like my transition from what this guy is talking about. So sorry for the spoiler alert for like this movie that's like 20 years old now. He doesn't actually find out who the killer is. And one of the like last scenes of the movie is the detective looking up into the camera. And the director said the reason why the detective looked into the camera was so that way the director could tell that the killer who is still on the large that like they're looking for him and they're going to come for him. So I think that was just kind of a cool thing. So there can be good murder mystery movies and authors and like books and whatnot that don't actually give us the final answer, which I think is very surprising if you don't already like know of these things. But yeah, it can be done. Not to take anything away from like what he's saying here. It's just kind of popped into my mind right now.
Get frustrated by that kind of unsolvable mystery in their stories. Audiences don't like not having all the answers. They don't enjoy feeling like the author is withholding answers from them. They are unsatisfied with that kind of story's conclusion. Sometimes I see people express a similar frustration with the Souls games. We just want more information. Like, how the heck is it possible that Queen Marika and Radagon are the same person? How did they have children together? How can they work at completely cross purposes while inhabiting the same body? It doesn't make any sense. However, there is a whole genre of fiction, a genre which has been dramatically rising in popularity in recent years, called weird fiction. And unknowability is a central element of weird fiction. Unknowable knowledge was all over the place in the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. His characters were always dealing with forbidden knowledge, where it was like, if you even could learn this, it would break your freaking mind, dude. It would destroy your fragile little psyche. Knowledge of this would leave you a gibbering madman. The exact nature of that knowledge was never revealed in his stories. The whole point was that it couldn't be revealed. It was knowledge beyond human comprehension. It couldn't even be written down with human language. I've always loved this aspect of weird fiction because I think it matches our true lived experience of the universe. As a human being living on Earth in the 21st century, there is a vast and discomforting number of questions for which you will probably never ever have an answer, that perhaps can never be known. And some of these are very simple questions like, why is there anything instead of nothing? What is reality? What is God? What is a soul? What is consciousness? What is time? These are basic questions, people. It's not just frustrating not having satisfying and complete answers to these fundamental questions of the universe. It can actually be kind of anxiety-inducing, unsettling to think about how little we actually know about the basics of our reality and our perception of that reality. The unknowability of weird fiction taps into that anxiety, weaves it into our stories, and I think the Souls games actually tap into the same kind of thing. All of the Souls games are heavily inspired by weird fiction. These games are weird. Like, Queen America is weird, dude. These giant magical slowly rotting fingers, which commune with an outer god through digit vibrations, are freaking weird. These spreading...
Yeah, when I first heard of like the two fingers, I thought it was like a George R.R. Martinism, whereas like a little finger in A Song of Ice and Fire. Nope, they were two literal fingers that were just gigantic and rotting for no discernible reason. Hello, Alpha and Omega. Simple doesn't mean easy. That is very true. Welcome to the stream.
Rot blossoming new alien life within the body of millennia, a cursed blessing from a different outer god of unclear or perhaps incomprehensible motivations, that's weird too. All of this is weird. All of these plot threads and characters involve unknowable mysteries, unanswerable questions. Like, where the heck did these giant fingers come from? When and how did they split off from these three other giant fingers? Why do these fingers simp so hard for the Golden Order? And why do these fingers want to burn the universe down to a primordial state of lifeless chaos? What is going on here? But let's get back to the original question of this essay, which was, why are we so obsessed with the lore of the Souls games? Unknowability is a big part of the answer. Humans are so driven by curiosity. We are not satisfied with, well, there just isn't an answer to this mystery. We will never stop searching for that answer, not until we find some satisfying explanation, even if we have to make up that explanation ourselves. That's part of why people get so obsessed with the lore of the Souls games, because there are all these questions without satisfying answers, and so fans keep playing and replaying, re-listening to the dialogue, rereading item descriptions, making new connections, discussing it together on forums, making hour-long video essays, all to find some satisfying explanation. And from
So, I agree with him to an extent about the unknowability being part of the fun of looking into the games. However, I do think there is a little bit of nuance to this, and he might go into it further along in the video. However, at least for me, one aspect that I particularly enjoy about delving into the lore of these games is also interacting with the community at large in general, because even if some of the facts are not going to change about like the games in terms of like the item descriptions, I do think the perceptions or perspectives that we all have as individuals can be very interesting to see where they align and where they don't. And going beyond that, it's just kind of a byproduct of like literary criticism to come up with new and interesting ways of deconstructing and reconstructing a piece of literature, which I would consider a game literature, to be honest, and coming to new appreciations based off of each other's perspectives. So I'm trying to think of an example right now. I mean, we've got so many content creators in the stream right now where I have been going through this new kind of journey for myself of like looking at what other content creators are saying and comparing where their perspectives and mine may differ. But there's also an aspect of literary criticism that moves beyond what the game is literally saying, and it goes and focuses on the analytics of like metaphorical, like figurative language. I'm struggling right now. Man, like metaphorical reconstructions. Like, why can't I articulate this thought? Let me read chat real quick. Like the blind man and the elephant, not quite like that. analyzing literature and not looking at what it like literally says, but coming up with new ways to interpret what it's saying metaphorically. So, considering, I mean, tomorrow, what I do have like lined up for the schedule, we'll be talking about like femininity in Bloodborne. And so I haven't watched that video yet. It's been on my radar for a long time, and I figure why not watch it tomorrow since it's kind of like come up in chat a bit. And so there's different layers and different like filters you can kind of have on your perspective of a game that can change the way you interpret it, which I think is a lot more interesting in some ways than just like quibbling over like the literal definitions of words and items at times, which is kind of really ironic coming from me, you know. But that's just kind of the niche that I can fill within the lore community at large. So I'm just kind of filling that out for now. One of my videos about the suspicious beggar and the fake Yosefka in Bloodborne is one of my favorite video essays that I've done, because it's not focusing so much on semantics and language. It's more about like the philosophical questions about like what the value of man is in a game like Bloodborne. And when you have these kind of perspectives that aren't tied directly to like the game text in general, I think that can really elevate the discourse surrounding these games to like a higher level, I guess.
Software is so brilliant because they almost always include just enough details, just enough pieces of the puzzle to let the player get started, just enough pieces for us to create our own explanations. In this way, the audience becomes an active part of the storytelling process. We tell as much of the story ourselves as the writers do. But let's rewind here. Let's go all the way back to the Undead Burg area in Dark Souls, because there are some really weird details in the environment here that demonstrate another essential element of Souls world design. On the surface, the Undead Burg looks like a pretty familiar place. It looks really similar to a lot of other medieval fantasy settings. You've got characters in chainmail and iron armor, wielding swords and shields and crossbows. You can see stone castle walls, cobblestone streets, little houses full of crude wooden furniture. You can find cathedrals and ramparts and dragons and thieves and merchants. A lot of things you would expect to find in a setting like this one. But on a closer look, it very quickly becomes clear how different the Undead Burg is from any other medieval fantasy setting. Because from a practical standpoint, if we're expected to believe that people actually lived ordinary lives in this place at some point, the Undead Burg doesn't make any sense at all. Its physical layout is completely insane. The Undead Burg was constructed hundreds of feet in the air, on a series of massive castle ramparts and walls, defensive structures that don't appear to be defending anything or have any purpose at all, that end in seemingly random spots. The Undead Burg streets are crooked and contorted, twisted around on top of and underneath each other in bizarre and bewildering ways. If you were just a regular person, life would be very difficult here. Transportation would be nearly impossible. Just getting around would be confusing and dangerous, even if there weren't any monsters around.
I really like how in Bloodborne, when you get to the Great Bridge area, there's a bunch of like broken down carriages and horse corpses up on the bridge, but there's literally no entry or exit ramps on the bridge that we can see in that section of Yharnam. Maybe it's beneath the Cathedral Ward, who knows, but it's just a little bit ironic because even if it was in the Cathedral Ward, there's no exit ramp into central Yharnam, but I digress. And Crunchy was saying that there's something they've never been able to express about the weird poetic aspect in FromSoft, which isn't exactly either literal or metaphorical. It's like the myths, dreams, or myths, dreams, or parables or something. Yeah, kind of. Like, I think that just kind of goes into world building. There is probably better terminology that we can use to describe it that I'm just kind of failing to grasp right now. Alpha and Omega says hermeneutics, which looking at Google means that it's the kind of branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, such as biblical or literary texts, which makes a lot of sense, and I'll probably look into that term a little bit more on my own here. after stream or something. So thanks for bringing that word up. I appreciate that. So yeah, like a lot of the stories in FromSoft games are fairy tales that are like pertinent to these worlds only, which is a lot harder to do and make up than you would initially expect. To kind of make a fairy tale that feels organic to the setting, it's kind of a ridiculous task, to be honest. So obviously there's a lot of people who have gripes with Joseph Campbell, but I do think that he is really good for kind of getting at like the core of like a lot of like basic beliefs inherent amongst almost all humans in all like societies. So I think he's a kind of like good starting launching off point for like delving into this stuff more on one's own. Chompy says, art really lives not solely in the piece created, but in the interaction between the creation and the observer. And yeah, death of the author, as the video alludes to. Yes. So Scowleezy, welcome back to the stream. You missed everything. Everything literally happened in the past 4 days. You ruined. Tons of cities in real life don't get planned out beforehand. Stuff just gets built on wherever it's possible. Yes, however, FatBrett does make the point that like these quote-unquote defensive structures in the Undead Burg aren't very defensive and everything. Hey Colo, nice to see you again. So we are going through the video by FatBrett of why are we obsessed with the lore of Dark Souls and Elden Ring. So far we've talked about layered history, player-driven discovery, and unknowability in the text, and now we are on unreality. So we're just kind of talking about the different ways of interpreting the lore of these games.
There is no natural water source anywhere nearby, nowhere to grow or hunt or forage for food. Yharnam, the Victorian-inspired urban setting of Bloodborne, has a lot of similar peculiarities. Once again, on the surface, this is a familiar setting. It looks like a lot of other Victorian settings in a lot of other video games. But just like with the Undead Burg, as soon as you start to explore, things start getting weird. Once again, the physical layout is crooked and contorted, with streets twisted around on top of each other in confusing ways. There are odd little details like seemingly ancient gravestones that are completely blocking much newer doorways. Did someone build a house in front of an old gravestone in such a way that it is impossible to open the front door? Or did they haul this old gravestone from somewhere else and intentionally block their own door with it? And
yeah, that's actually one of my favorite physical details about Bloodborne, just like how nonsensical some of these placements are.
the big details are even stranger. Yharnam as a city simply would not function. I cannot find any evidence anywhere of any commercial or industrial infrastructure anywhere in this city. Where are all of these firearms and carriages and clothing, etc. manufactured in this city? Where are...
Well, the carriages and stuff might be manufactured partly in central Yharnam. There's also like the lower ward in Cathedral Ward, where you like drop out of the Hunter's Workshop. Well, the Healing Church Workshop, technically. And throughout Old Yharnam, not Old Yharnam, but throughout like this section of Yharnam and that section, you can see like little signs on some of these houses, which look like toothed swords. So there might have been like carpenters and whatnot. But anyway, like we're just kind of like splitting hairs here because it obviously doesn't really work in a functional modern city sense.
Are they sold? Where is the food gathered and prepared? Where is the food sold or served? Where are all the hundreds of thousands of gallons of water that would be necessary to keep a city of this size alive? Every single well.
And you can see like an ocean further on. But for what it's worth, where we meet Eileen is technically supposed to be a dry dock. So the canals in Yharnam are supposed to be filled at some point, but they seem dilapidated and run down and as though they haven't been filled with water in quite some time at this point.
Well and fountain are dried up and appear to have been dry for decades. The canals are all dried up too. Yharnam is a bizarre city made up exclusively of residential.
So yeah, you can see the ocean over there, and you can see the ocean when you're trying to get from Hemwick into Cainhurst as well. or if not an ocean, just a vast, gigantic lake.
Buildings, packed tightly together with innumerable cathedrals, most of which don't appear to serve any specific religious purpose. There are all these pointless cathedrals, which appear to have been built just for the sake of having one more cathedral, in a city which already has way more cathedrals than anyone could ever possibly need. It doesn't make any sense. How would this city ever function as an actual city, like as a place where people actually live? You can find examples like these in every Souls games. Settings that look normal on the outside, but as soon as you take a closer look, they just don't make any sense at all. Sometimes I've seen people criticize this style of world design. They call it a mistake, but it's only a mistake if the developers were actually attempting to create a setting that made practical real-world sense in the first place. And I don't think that's what From Software was ever trying to do. From Software doesn't create real-world settings, they create unreal settings. They don't create literal settings, instead they create thematic settings. And what I mean by that is that they create settings which are meant to convey a theme, or an idea, or a feeling, or an atmosphere, rather than a setting that's actually practical or sensible. For example,
Yeah, and I was going to say that even with Bloodborne's Yharnam and kind of Lordran being set up the way that they are and being like having unrealistic settings here, there can be the arguments made that these locations are liminal spaces, as you guys have been saying in chat, where Yharnam itself might be part of a dream, kind of Inception style. So the layout of the city there doesn't necessarily need to make a lot of sense, and in some ways it would make more sense if it doesn't make sense, which is a little bit ironic when you say it that way. But Lordran itself also has this weird convergence thing going on where it's also technically not quote-unquote in the world of men. So is like the land of the gods like kind of a spiritual type realm, perhaps? And if so, maybe the representations of the undead burg and whatnot are not a literal undead burg, but as much as it is like a spiritual one, and the environment may be warped kind of in a similar way to dreams as well. So Matthew S., welcome into the stream. He said, could these infrastructure inconsistencies be explained by the deterioration time loops incur? More time spent in hunts than linear living? Potentially, and like I was just saying a moment ago, it could just be like, we're not actually in true reality in these games, which I think is like the most sensible answer in some ways if you don't want to secede your point to the idea that video games should have like realistic settings to have like realistic environments and characters. Sorry, I'm just kind of articulating that point poorly. Chompy says, gives the games a certain vibe, a je ne sais quoi, that people often cite when they talk about how the games relax their feelings of anxiety and depression, despite ostensibly oppressive atmosphere. And to be fair, like, most video games don't have super realistic depictions of geography, buildings, and architecture. And to me, like, one of the first games that I actually remembered having toilets and just kind of like being fond of because of it was Final Fantasy VII. If you go into like most random NPC houses, there's going to be like a little sequestered room with like a toilet or like a bath, which was just not par for the course before that game really came out. I'm certain some games also had it, but like for most games at the time, like they were so small that they couldn't really diversify their assets enough to have that kind of info just in the game. Whereas like Final Fantasy VII was 3 discs from when it came out on PlayStation 1, which is 2 discs larger than most other games. So some of those things are just like concessions to gameplay mechanics where they don't like make everything truly realistic, just because it would be too tedious to do so, especially if they don't serve a true like diegetic purpose. There's a difference between being realistic and going out of your way to be over detailed. Exactly. Siegfried in DS3 makes Estus soup. Well, at least in like the Dark Souls games, they kind of do make it a point where like eating and even pooping aren't par for the course anymore.
Example, in the Undead Burg, all those weird megalithic concentric defensive walls that don't look like they're defending anything aren't even meant to be literally defending anything. Instead, they are meant to convey this idea of strength and power. The thicker your castle walls are and the more of them you have, the more powerful you are. And Lordran is the site of great power. All of those seemingly purposeless cathedrals in Yharnam, which don't appear to be practical sites of religious worship, they are meant to convey an idea of a city's population that has been gripped by a fanatical religion, that has become such an overwhelming presence in their lives that it dominates everything, becomes cluttered and claustrophobic. This fanatical religion has actually choked all life in the city, and you can see that visually in the physical design of the city. Another interesting example is down in Old Yharnam. I've already talked a little bit about how Old Yharnam was burned down to prevent the spread of the Beast Plague. However, everything in the lore, all of the dialogue and clues, strongly suggest that this burning happened a long time ago, years ago, decades ago, maybe even longer than that. However, when you explore Old Yharnam, it's still burning. There are still fires here, still corpses smoking. That doesn't make any sense from a literal sense, but it does make sense if you assume the developers are working thematically. These still burning fires aren't meant to be taken seriously, but instead are meant to convey the idea of burning, of disaster, of the extremes the hunters were willing to go to protect the rest of the city from the Beast Plague. You always have to be careful when you're examining small details in the settings of these games. You should always ask yourself, is this meant to be a literal detail, or is this more of a thematic detail? There is a tension between what these settings look like and how they actually function. I call this tension unreality, because it makes the worlds of these games feel sort of unreal, and it's the fourth essential world design element I want to examine in this essay. This sense of unreality isn't limited to just the physical settings of the games. Unreality extends deep into the stories as well. These games look like they're set in a normal Earth-like world where both physics and spirituality work the same way as they do in our world. But just like the way the Undead Burg looks like a normal medieval setting but actually isn't, neither are the stories. Okay, so let me explain what I mean. In Dark Souls, there's a lot of talk about humanity. Item descriptions and characters are constantly talking about humanity this and humanity that. Now, in any other story, the word humanity would mean something pretty simple. It would just refer to the human race. But that's not quite what the word means in Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, the term humanity specifically refers to this literally dark soul that exists within all members of the human race of this world.
And part of the issue with this is kind of translation, but not really. And the reason why I say not really is because humanity does get across what's said in Japanese to an extent. It's just an issue with like English and whatnot, where like humanity in terms of like the humanity sprite is ningen sei. So let me just pull up like the good old G show for you guys. So this would be like ningen sei, and it does mean humanity as in like human nature. So the first two characters here literally means human or humanity. Damn it. Humanity. It does mean like humanity as in like the human race. But this character right here, the last one, is like the quality. So the quality of the human race or the quality of man. So humanness in a sense. Not like humaneness, because that's a different word in English. So let's look at the details here. So the first character is person or man, doesn't necessarily actually mean human. The next one is interval or space, but when you combine them, it's like a Chinese reading, so that's where you get human from, as in like humanity. And then the last one is like the character. Damn it. It's the character, the kanji for like character or quality. So you have sex, gender, or the nature of something. So like the nature of humanity, the nature of man, essentially, is what humanity means in Dark Souls, which doesn't actually make things clearer despite me being so pedantic about this, but just like wanting to point this out. But I do think it is a little bit more helpful for trying to conceptualize what the hell like these black humanity sprites are in relation to like the hollows and stuff, because if the black sprites represent the human nature found within the beings in this world, then what does that say about us as hollows when we die and lose our humanity? I think that's kind of where some of these ideas are meant to get tied together. That isn't quite as readily available in English, just due to the ambiguity of the language here. Crunchy says, the setting has some reason for reality to work by rules where thematic things and literal things are blurred though. Can we have more streams where I teach you guys Japanese? Maybe, I don't know. I just try to point out where I think things can be clearer or just aren't very clear in general, so yeah.
Mysterious dark soul which exists alongside their normal soul. Unraveling the mystery of this extra soul, this so-called humanity, is central to unraveling all the mysteries of this fictional world, how it functions at a very basic level. Another example might be godhood in Elden Ring. When characters talk about godhood in this game, I don't think they quite mean the same thing as when that word is used in other stories. Everyone constantly talks about how Queen Marika is a full-blooded real god, a being of tremendous power, but we never actually see that power in the game. Instead, we see a Queen Marika who has been captured and confined, who appears nearly powerless. Apparently, Queen Marika wasn't always a god, but we have no clue how she became one. There are other characters who are said to have the potential to become new gods, but it's never explained what those godly criteria are, except that it definitely requires the influence of something called an outer god, a being even stranger and even more powerful. Just like with humanity in Dark Souls, unraveling the mystery of godhood in Elden Ring is central to unraveling everything. The Souls games use ideas that on the surface initially seem like they're being used in the same familiar way as they are used in other fantasy settings. Humanity, godhood. But once you delve into the lore, you will discover that these familiar terms are being used to describe something completely alien and foreign and new.
That's I think been dialed up to 11 in Elden Ring, especially because is death even death? Because we're told that Godwin is dead, but technically his body is half alive. Ronnie is dead, but her soul is still alive. So what is death? What is destined death? Is something that's dead due to destined death? Probably not so much anymore, but if anybody else was in Crunchy's stream earlier today, he was asking all of these kinds of hard-hitting questions and also pointing out that our current understanding of things are obviously colored by our perspectives of the real world, but not all of those perspectives apply to a game like Elden Ring, which is what Brett is bringing up here, which I think is a very important thing to point out in general. And as Crunchy was saying in his stream earlier today, when we hear the word God here in the West, we tend to have that idea of God colored by the monotheistic Abrahamic religion perception of God. So that's a very defined, very powerful image of God, whereas something like the term used for God in Elden Ring, like Kami, could be a little softer, or actually a lot bit softer, and it might be more along the lines of the Roman pantheon, the Norse pantheon, where gods weren't necessarily omnipotent or near omnipotent beings, when they were just stronger than most humans, or a little bit wiser, whatever kind of quality you want to aspire to a certain god. But not all of them were going to be able to move mountains, If you called it something like Dark Spirit, it would be hard to make the connection, and Dark Souls would make a lot of issues in the lore. Kami are also spirits as much as they are gods, so I'm right in that regard. God in Japanese was called Deusu or something like that. I don't know about that. If it's Deusu, I'm just assuming it'd be a transliteration of Deus from Latin. Crunchy says, Elden Ring have me what is thingness? Is it itself or not? For real. Future Warrior Hero 123, welcome in. Do I think the DLC will be delayed due to the strikes? No, definitely not due to the strikes. Part of the issue with that is the strikes are more governed by actors in the capacity of the US. I do know there is some like joint stuff going on with like the UK, but I don't think the voice actors for Elden Ring and most FromSoft games are done by SAG-AFTRA affiliated members. Although I might be wrong there. That's kind of an interesting question though. Or if your Dionysian godlike powers being immune to hangovers, yeah.
Unreality in both the story and in the world building. I think this sense of unreality is a big reason why we get so obsessed with the lore of these games. The setting and the stories and the ideas are all familiar, but we can sense that something is off, something is different here. There's an uncanny valley effect that covers every aspect of the design, from the visuals to the stories themselves. One of the reasons why I love the city of Yharnam so much is because it doesn't feel like a real place. Exploring Yharnam feels like I'm exploring a dream world, a dark reflection of our own world, where people cannot live ordinary lives, so they must live extraordinary lives here. That's the kind of setting I want to spend a lot of time in. If From Software fixed Yharnam to be more like a practical city, I don't think I would be as interested. And I think this is one of the hardest elements of Souls world design for copycats to imitate. This is something that a lot of Souls-like games are missing, and that's not surprising to me. A couple games do nail it, like Blasphemous and Hollow Knight are two games that I think do a fantastic job of recreating this sense of unreality, and doing it in very different ways too. But most Souls-like games don't even come close. I think it's probably really hard to create a setting that looks familiar on the surface, but underneath functions in a totally different and unique way. It's an impressive feat of world design, and something I think deserves to receive more attention from fans. Souls games show us things we've never seen before in a fantasy setting, just so long as we're willing to dig underneath that seemingly ordinary surface. Now, to end this video, I want to discuss one final essential element to Souls world design, and this one is a lot simpler than the last couple, but still just as important. I call this last element hostility and hope, which are two ideas that are closely tied together in these games. Let's start with hostility. The settings of these games are intensely hostile places. Everything is trying to kill you. There are so few safe havens, so few friendly faces here compared to other fantasy RPGs. It feels like everything and everyone you meet wants to kill you. There is no diplomacy in these settings, no compromise. You can never talk or trick your way through any obstacle. These are kill or be killed worlds. It is vicious.
Meanwhile, I'm just thinking about Patches making us Dogeza in Elden Ring, or having us stop killing him, essentially. But yeah, generally he's right here.
I think this is part of why players tend to become so attached to the few friendly characters who do exist. And this hostility extends beyond just the monsters. The setting itself is physically hostile to the player. I've already talked some about how twisting and convoluted and confusing the layouts of the Undead Burg and Central Yharnam are. Well, a lot of these twists and turns are actually designed to kill you. You're supposed to get tricked by ambushes, trapped in impossible fights, get thrown off walkways. The world itself is designed to kill you, and this extends into the lore as well. In Dark Souls, your player character is a hollow, a bearer of the dark sign, a cursed and wretched creature hated by all human kingdoms. In this world, hollows are hunted, killed, burned, tortured, imprisoned, and all of this is tied to that mystery of humanity, that dark extra soul, because everything in these stories is connected together. In Bloodborne, Yharnam is a deeply xenophobic society, and your character is a foreigner. The people of Yharnam hate you, mock you, bar you from safe havens, hide important knowledge from you, even hunt and kill you just for being an outsider. In Elden Ring, not only are you a member of a condemned people, stripped of their godly blessings, exiled from your homeland for an unnamed sin, hated and spurned by the denizens of the lands between. But even among your kind, you are lesser. As the very first NPC you meet points out, you are maidenless, you are friendless, you have no guide and no companions. The monsters of these games want you dead, the world itself wants you dead, and even the story wants you dead. And not just you, the story wants all of the characters you meet dead too. The story is constantly killing off likable characters in miserable and heartbreaking ways. This is one of the easiest.
It's so funny when Siegmeyer dies like that, where you just talk to him and then he just collapses. Crunchy just said, the first thing that happens in Dark Souls is you spend 30 minutes designing a cool character, then Miyazaki's like, nope, you're gross beef jerky, man, Limafau. You're almost right about that. I think you forgot another 0 on your minute counter there. No, but in all seriousness, apparently the reason why they made the Champion of Ash an Ashen one in Dark Souls 3 is because Miyazaki and the devs felt bad for having so many characters or players make characters and go through all that time the character creation screen just for them to turn into beef jerky. So just goes to show how malleable the lore really is. The monsters want me dead? How shocking. Everything wants you dead feels like a bad omen to join in on. Welcome in, Stella. Everybody's out to get you. Hey Lass, something you don't get about dragons in FromSoft games is that they're portrayed as very wise/intelligent beings, but we never seem to converse with them, nor they us. They just attack us. So that's kind of an interesting thing to bring up, and I think part of the reason for that is that the characters in these worlds view dragons as otherworldly, quote-unquote, transcendental beings, which is kind of true to an extent because they do transcend the cycle of fire and darkness. And so there is an aspect of them that is beyond the knowledge of humans, and with their kind of weird ties to magic and or sorcery, it does make sense for characters to assume that they have a high intellect as well. However, I feel like that is just kind of a bit of a mistaken belief on parts of those characters, because we're told time and time again, especially in Dark Souls 2 with Sin and the Lindelt Drakeblood Knights, that they believed piercing the side of a dragon and taking of its sacrosanct Drakeblood would allow them to peer beyond the veil, essentially, and attain transcendental thoughts for themselves. However, when they did succeed in their mission, instead of Drakeblood pouring out of Sin, the slumbering dragon, poison spewed from his side and cleansed the city in poisonous death, essentially. So, it's a little bit of yes and no that like drakes are kind of intelligent, but if they do possess intelligence, it seems to be of a kind that's fundamentally at odds with the nature of mankind, perhaps. Yeah, dragons just don't speak common.
World design elements for Souls-like games to imitate. Just fill your video game world up with monsters, craft a level design that's hard to navigate, full of ambushes and traps, make the player character be born of some wretched and hated lineage, kill off all the nice characters over the course of the story, and bam, there you go. Souls-likes are usually really good at crafting their own hostile worlds, but they're often missing something else. The Souls settings are really bleak and depressing places, where almost nothing ever works out for anyone. Everyone you like dies, everything is terrible, except these settings are not hopeless. There are these faint little slivers of hope to be found in these settings. Let's start with some of the characters. In all of these games, there are characters who are so kind-hearted, so compassionate, who just want to help. I haven't talked about Demon Souls yet in this video, but one of my all-time favorite characters in any of these games is Stockpile Thomas, this man who fled his home before the March of the Demon Fog. and abandoned his wife and child in the process. Thomas feels such deep guilt and shame for his failure, but he treats the player character so kindly in a world where everything else hates you. He's trying so hard to be useful, to make up for his past mistakes in some small way. I love this guy. He's such a minor character, but so well written and so likable. In Bloodborne, there is this beggar. He is a hideous character. His body is twisted and gray colored. He looks like a monster, but that monstrous appearance is hiding a kind heart. This beggar, who has probably lived a very hard life, who has been cast out of society, derided and scorned, has created a safe haven, a place where people can survive the ravages of the beast plague. And he does it for no reason other than that he wants to help. He wants to save lives. He even saves people who continue to treat him like crap after being saved. And he expresses no resentment towards them. He's practically a saint. In Dark
So yeah, we've almost got like an inverse Disney rule going on where like the more hideous the character, the more benevolent they can be. Like the Chapel Dweller is very nice. Queen Annalise is kind of disfigured with her mask potentially, but she is nice. Ariana is a whore, which is, you know, pretty low on the rungs of the Disney totems there, but she's the good character, and the sacrosanct nun character is the jealous one who will kill others out of her jealous rage. So it's a little bit ironic how FromSoft games turn out. And as for the hot characters, they're really bad, right? Because we've got like the very shirtless washboard ab having Radigan being just an absolute piece of trash. No, but in all seriousness, I wouldn't go that far to say like it's the true inverse of like the Disney paradigm there, where like ugly characters are inherently better, but it's just kind of ironic how they do use some characters' appearance to deceive and mislead the player.
Souls, you even have outright silly goofball characters, like Siegmeyer of Katarina, this optimistic and upbeat but sort of oafish warrior who constantly gets trapped or stuck and can only progress with the help of the player. He's not trying to accomplish anything grand here in Lordran, he just wants to go on a fun adventure, wants to see how far he can go. These little slivers of goodness and kindness are so important. These games would be so miserable without characters like Stockpile Thomas or the Beggar or Siegmeyer. They would be bleak and hopeless settings without any light or fun or anything to fight for. And I do think this sliver of hope extends all throughout the lore too. As horrific as their histories are, as poorly as things are going in the present, there is a sense in these games that things could be made better, that you, the player, could have a positive impact on these worlds. For example, Elden Ring's story ultimately becomes all about finding ways to fix or enhance, or even replace the grievous and authoritarian rule of the Golden Order. Throughout the game, you see all these terrible things the Golden Order has done, all these terrible ways that innocent people have been treated under this rule, but you are given several options with which to repair that order, to make it fairer, or to even cast the whole thing aside and build something new in its place. Elden Ring is ultimately a hopeful story about repairing a broken world, and this is something that I think a lot of Souls-likes are missing. They do a great job of imitating the bleakness and the misery and the hostility, but they're missing the lightness, the kindness, the silliness, and the hope. The Souls
To tie into that, I do think it's a really important facet of FromSoft's games that they have co-op, and that it isn't like limited to like local co-op, and being able to be summoned into another person's world, both as a hostile player or as a helpful one, I do think helps characterize what kind of world you want there to be, and that people, like being shown that people are willing to help you, I think also does take away some of the sting of these games, even if you do get invaded by some real sweats out there. Solaire's a dirty little power gamer that farms levels from co-op and uses you to practice the bosses so he kills them on his first try in his own world. You're not wrong there, are you? You were wondering if Radigan is himself a god, little g, when we fight him? Was just curious due to the remembrance in Marika's Chambers. So I've been thinking about that a bit more off stream. I don't necessarily think Radigan is technically a god despite the god slain text that shows up when you kill the Elden Beast. I think the Elden Beast is technically the god, and even though we do get the Sacred Relic Sword, which should have come from, Radagon's body there, I think it is supposed to represent the Elden Beast's body in the item that we get. And the reason why I'm saying this now is when you look at, hold on. When you look at the Wave of Gold, Ash of War art, whatever you want to call it, it does like the Litany of Proper Death thing, except it's backwards. And it's coming out of itself the same way that it comes out of the Elden Beast when it does its attack. So I think this is supposed to be more of an Elden Beast thing than a Radagon thing. Because I did go back through the Radagon fights, and I noticed that he doesn't actually use Litany of Proper Death, which is interesting. It's only the Elden Beast, and it has like this version of the arc coming out of it. So maybe this blade is supposed to be the Elden Beast and not Radagon, and that could explain why it's the remains of a god that should have lived a life eternal. But that's just kind of a coping on my part, to be honest there. What's the significance of an Empyrean in the sense of how do they differ from a demigod? Example, Melina or Melania is an Empyrean, but she didn't seem to be any stronger than Radahn. So that's a good question, and we don't really know. I think the important thing is they may be able to become the quote-unquote vessel for the vision, and so that seems to be like the bigger deal, and we don't exactly know why they're capable of doing it. Is it something that's conferred upon them by the Two Fingers? Perhaps, but if so, that doesn't explain why Miquella and Melania were kind of born as Empyreans, I guess. So, we don't really know. You disagree strongly with that? Radagon is Marika, so you killed Marika there? Regardless, like, Marika's body still exists even if you kill Radagon, so it's kind of weird to try to reconcile that stuff. You say the Elden Beast is like the Rune of Death and the Forge of Giants. It can't die. It's part of the order. I do think you still kill it. And one of the interesting things to me is in the fractured endings, when you do repair the Elden Ring, it looks like the little shards in it have disappeared. The shards that might have been like Radagon's Elden Rune. So maybe we do remove his rune and maybe that rune is the Elden Beast. Or like became the Elden Beast. It's weird. Don't like fully quote me on that. Those are just kind of some like passing thoughts for now. Alright, going back to the video.
Games are famous for their depressing story, but it's actually the often overlooked glimmers of hope that make them truly great stories. So there it is. Those are the 5 elements of world design that I think explain what makes us so obsessed with Souls lore. Layered history, player-driven discovery, unknowability, unreality, and hostility mixed with hope. In these games, we explore ancient settings with deep layers of history, and we discover those layers on our own, by our own volition. Those layers are full of unknowable mysteries that drive us to keep searching through medieval kingdoms and Victorian cities that never feel quite real, hostile settings that are trying to kill us, but which at their cores hide these little glimmers of hope. Through this combination of elements, From Software has crafted some of the most compelling and most fascinating settings anywhere in video games, settings which I will never get tired of returning to. This was a really fun essay for me to write. I love the stories of the Souls games and I love talking about them. I don't know if anyone else still cares about the lore of older games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne anymore, but I do, and I think I'm going to keep making more videos about them. One thing I didn't talk about much in this essay is that every single Souls game is set in a post-apocalyptic world. All of these games are set in dead worlds that have been devastated by disaster and catastrophe. I think the next Souls essay I write will be focused on that. Why are the writers at From Software so attracted to that kind of post-apocalyptic setting? Why are we as players attracted to it? What effect does it have on the story? What narrative themes can you explore in this sort of setting? What are its limitations? But those are questions for another time and another video. A question I want to ask right now is, which imitators, which Souls-likes, actually managed to nail all of these essential elements of world design. The one that jumps to mind for me is always Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight doesn't really play at all like a Souls game, but its world design really reminds me of Dark Souls, and I think you can easily find all 5 of these elements in its design. Blasphemous comes pretty close. It definitely has a setting that feels unreal and is full of unknowable mysteries that you discover on your own, but I'm not sure if it has a layered history or very much in the way of hope. I don't think a lot of popular Souls-likes, like The Surge or Lords of the Fallen or even Neo, have many of these elements, which is why despite being pretty good games, I've never really been hooked by any of them. Armored Core 6 just came out, the first new Armored Core game in like a decade. Obviously, we all know that the gameplay is mechanically completely different than the Souls games, but what I'm curious about is, will it have the world design of a Souls game? Will it have the story of a Souls game wrapped in a different gameplay package? Does the planet Rubicon have a layered history? Do you have to discover that history on your own? Does that world include unknowable mysteries? Does it feel sort of unreal? Does it contain themes of both hostility and hope? I genuinely would be curious to know what other games people think feature some of these same elements of world design. If you can think of any, please do share them with me. There's nothing I love more in video games than finding a new fascinating world to explore.
So that was a really good video. I do think there might be a little bit more nuance to breaking down what makes a Souls-like, or however you want to call them at this point. So, with that being said, even though it's an older game that predates the Souls games, I would obviously recommend Metroid Prime as a good example of that. I do think it becomes a bit more difficult trying to recommend games earlier than that, just because, like, the style of storytelling was just a bit different. So for me, like, the most Dark Souls-like games in terms of their story presentations come to mind as, like, a Metroid Prime or Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, those kind of games. Maybe Starfield is similar, although I haven't really looked into Starfield much at all. Obviously, like, Oblivion and Skyrim don't really fit that mold, and, well, I mean, they kind of do, but not really. They're just kind of like apples and oranges, I suppose, trying to compare them directly, but anyway, not too important. So, Colo said, "This isn't directed at me, nor my fault in any way, but you're sort of giving up on lore. It always gives you this feeling that it makes you more stressed than anything else." Yeah, no, that's understandable. My recommendation is to just kind of do what you enjoy, and if you're recognizing that something is making you stressed out, I would highly recommend either, like, taking a break, re-examining things, and coming back to it if you're feeling more energized by looking into it. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm assuming for, like, most everyone here, this is kind of like more of a hobby or like an entertainment thing. This isn't necessarily like a way of life by any means. So there's no real sense in trying to stress yourself out if you're just trying to chill out, max out, and relax all cool outside of the school. Grime setting scratches that itch? I've never heard of Grime. Lore's life? Yeah, maybe. Future warrior hero hopes we interact with Godwin in the DLC. You feel he's a mystery we definitely need to explore. What are my thoughts about why Ronnie chose Godwin as a sacrifice? Honestly, I don't really try to have a lot of expectations. One, to not get let down, and two, just because we don't have enough info for me to have like a really strong opinion. So I don't know whether or not Godwin was specifically targeted, even though he's called like a martyr of destined death in one of the Finger Reader Crone's dialogues, or whether or not he was just kind of collateral damage in Ronnie trying to rid herself of her body, or maybe he was willing to do what he did, which, you know, would not be very intuitive, and I don't think is very likely, but I feel like you almost never know in these games anymore. So anyway, I have gone ahead and linked FatBrett's video here into chat. This is a brand new video. I haven't watched anything by him before. I don't know what else what kind of content he produces, but he did say he wants to make more like Dark Souls videos.
In preparation for the
Oops. So I'm probably going to give him a sub just to see where he moves along here in the future. Or, yeah, I guess I'll just wait until I see like more content that kind of speaks to me. So anyway, I did enjoy this video. I left it a like, so if you guys enjoyed it as well, please do him the kindness and visiting it and giving him that thumbs up that all of us content creators covet and desire. All right. So moving on to the next video, we have SinclairLore's Manus, Father of the Abyss with AesirAesthetics. All right.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, Aesir.
Hello.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Snack Covenant, episode 261, Manus. This is a pre-intro to the actual episode because the actual episode ran a little long and was like one of our classics, which are virtually unlistenable.
Yeah, it's over 2 hours right now.
So instead of making people sit through this, we're gonna do a quick TLDR of the episode.
You're so considerate.
So, who is Manus?
Probably Ulysseal sorcerer who was messing with stuff he found in a grave and turned into a big hand monster.
What effect did that have on Ulysseal?
Ooh, not very good.
He's auto subsid. What effect did that have on Ulysses?
What happened to Manus in the end?
Killed. Becomes queens. Was there ever a moment in an item description where he is referred to as a phantom?
I don't think so.
Like
Yeah, I don't think so either. Oh, you got us.
It's almost 3:30 where I am when we're recording this.
Yeah.
I'll forgive it.
As funny as the penetrator. Okay, perfect. And then I'll ask a Brutus to come in and be like, well, you heard it all. Now you don't have to listen to the podcast.
Hello everybody! Sophie, Sin, and Aesir did such a good job summarizing the topic in this pre-intro that the rest of the podcast is completely redundant and you don't have to listen to it if you don't want to. But if you do enjoy redundancy, please visit patreon.com/SinclairLore for more content that's of absolutely no educational value whatsoever. We now begin Queens of Dark Souls, Episode 0.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, Aesir.
Hi, are we recording?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Snack Covenant episode 261. And today we're gonna talk about Manus with our special guest, Aesir. Now, Aesir, some people watch us exclusively for the Prepare to Lore series. For the benefit of those people, could you please tell us who you are and what you do?
I'm Aesir. I come on these podcasts sometimes, but I also like to go through some old FromSoft games on my channel. And we did a massive collaboration for a big Bloodborne project, which is almost 10 hours long.
And what's your channel's name?
AesirAesthetics, one word.
And Aesir, you're also working on a very special project.
Yes, I'm working on a video game, Sin.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, and so I've spent the past 2 years building a bunch of assets, objects, codes, just building a lot of stuff with which to assemble a final game.
Mm-hmm.
But before dedicating myself to 6 or 8 months of assembling something, I decided I'd do a mini game first. First of all, to get an idea for how it comes together, but also to get an idea for what works and what doesn't. So that mini project is going to be coming out either soon or it probably is out by the time we release this. So
Honestly, I like the looks of this. It kind of reminds me of the old school Zeldas, and almost like Cladoon or something like that.
if people want to give it a shot and tell me what is and isn't working, I'd really appreciate that.
Awesome, and we'll post the links down below.
Awesome, thank you.
Super duper.
Super duper.
So now, today we're talking about Manus. And the reason we're talking about Manus, because Acer, Sophie, and I are Dark Souls 2 lore professionals. And we're going to cover the 4 queens of Dark Souls 2. But to do that, we obviously have to talk about Manus first. So, Manus. His full name is Manus, Father of the Abyss.
Yes.
Or it is in English.
Mm.
Sophie did some research.
Uh-oh.
Yes. His Japanese name is Shinen no Shu Manasu.
Ah, Master of the Abyss.
The subtitles were covering it. We did like 3 takes of this 10 seconds apart for some reason, so Acer knew what the answer was right away this time, lol.
Yes, that's correct. It's Master of the Abyss or Abyss Lord Manus.
I don't know if you wanted to wait on this, but like the elephant in the room, he's not the furtive pygmy.
I think if there was no Dark Souls 3, you could say maybe he was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think the implication in 1 is he's not, though. As far as 3 is concerned, he definitely isn't. As far as 1 is concerned, he probably isn't. It's like what happens in 2 where the souls get reborn, so it's like... He's clearly like just like some dude from Ulasil, but you find him like in a place that they talk about it as like the grave of primeval man.
So I think this is arguable even despite his grave being in Ulasil, because his grave predates Ulasil by a significant margin, or so it seems, because we have Chester telling us that they were deceived by Koth and they upturned the grave of, as it just says here right now, they upturned the grave of primeval man and incited his ornery wrath. So, could Manus be the furtive pygmy? Yes and no. Does it really impact the story? Yes and no. So the reason why I think it's yes and no is that if he is not the furtive pygmy, we never meet who the furtive pygmy is, which isn't really the end of the world by any means. However, with us fighting the, 7/8 original lords of Dark Souls 1, the reason why I say 8 is because, Gwyn divided his soul between Seath and the 4 kings. So you do go fight Seath, Gwyn, the Witch of Islith, and Nito. So it'd make a lot of thematic sense for me that the player would go fight the furtive pygmy in the DLC. But if that wasn't the furtive pygmy, it's not that big a deal because like man are like the essential descendants of the furtive pygmy, so it might not really be that big a deal that you don't meet the furtive pygmy. But could Manus predate Ulasil and or the Ringed City? Potentially. The Ringed City is a little bit of a wrinkle in the lore, trying to fit it into the timeline. Manus could potentially predate the Ringed City. We don't really know, because we don't actually know when the Ringed City first came into being. Obviously, we do have like the slave knights who did fight against the dragons and whatnot, and the Ringed City Knights also fought against the dragons. So there is a lot of overlap there, but Manus could have gotten the soul first and then died elsewhere. He might not have been part of the Ringed City. We don't really know. Anyway. Chompy has a hard time accepting that Manus ain't the pygmy, but 3 pretty much insists he wasn't. I think there's still room even with 3 and everything. And obviously the furtive pygmy is Velka. You got us. Raju Sharma, welcome into the stream. You play Souls games for the challenge and the difficulty. You don't care about the story. It's kind of ironic that you're in this stream then.
So it's like, okay, primeval man is probably the furtive pygmy.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, he's someone who like the furtive pygmy essence was transferred into him or something. So like, is he, isn't he? We don't know.
And Sophie,
Yes.
Earlier you said reborn.
Fuck you.
I like how all the subtitles, like, censor that
Hi,
stuff.
Sophie here. I'm a lot happier than normal because I'm just so excited to be talking about Reborn! Again! Reborn is an extremely influential and creative anime from 2006. Did you know that there's anime that's about a high school kid and it turns out he has special powers, but the special powers only manifest under very specific circumstances, and then he
Yeah, I've seen Tenchi Muyo.
joins up with a bunch of his friends, and all the friends conveniently have a special fighting style and a unique weapon, and then they have to fight some other people, and the other people all have corresponding styles and weapons. Did you know that? Sin didn't. She made us talk about it for 5 hours. Back to this podcast, which is not about Reborn.
Manus is the final boss of Artorias of the Abyss, which is the DLC for Dark Souls 1. Now Manus is located in Ulasil. And we can do a little quick overview of Ulasil for anyone who may not have done the DLC or who are not familiar with Dark Souls 1.
Okay.
People who are lazy. I'm calling them out.
Fun fact, I did the DLC, kind of. I specifically asked my boyfriend if I could play his copy on his PC so that he can do a thing where I have infinite lives. And I just walked around there, and at some point the dragon
Wait, what do you mean infinite lives? Were you playing a version of Dark Souls where your lives were finite?
died, but I didn't even encounter him because I was just walking around on air
Yeah.
and looking at things. And
Okay. Well, I did the DLC on level 1, so between us, if you average it out, we both did it properly.
excellent. So, Ulasil. Sorceries were really prevalent in Ulasil. Like, if you go there and you step on elevators, white light shines through, and people speculate that this is like special sorcery or magic making the elevators work.
Yes.
Well, Ulasil's really big into, like, light-based sorcery.
Yes, it is.
Is that the same magic they used to operate the Sanctuary Guardians? No, not the Sanctuary Guardians, the Golems.
Oh, the gardening ones.
What? I only remember the gardening ones.
Am I talking to fake Dark Souls fans?
The golems in Darker Garden, not in Ulasil, yeah.
Remember, they're the ones who slowed down your movement speed in
Oh,
Darkroot
yeah,
Forest.
the statues, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Acer. So, as we were saying, Ulasil is really big into magic. And it seems to be happy magic. But
Oh no.
some items paint a different side of Ulasil.
Do we really need items to paint a different side of Ulasil? I feel like when you're on the way there and there's a giant fucking chasm with, like, stuff leaking out of it, and Artorias is staggering around bleeding, like, Gatorade everywhere, something might have gone wrong.
Yeah, all the citizens are like corrupted by a rotting dark aura attacking
This
you.
is another mystery for Inspector Sinclair. Something's up here.
Something sketchy. And I did solve this mystery because
Oh.
Dark Fog states Abyss sorcery discovered by an Ulasil sorcerer on the brink of madness. Create a cloud of dark fog. Although dark fog is, in theory, relatively close to humanity, it also happens to be a terrible poison for humans. Perhaps it reflects man's cruelty against his own. Moreover, Dark Orb states Abyss sorcery discovered by an Ulasil sorcerer on the brink of madness. Fire giant dark orb. In contrast to the standard soul sorceries, Abyss sorceries are weighty and inflict physical damage. Perhaps human souls, because of their humanity, produce sorceries with a more tangible presence.
Do you think the old hotel owner was using those magics to scare teens away from the house so he could get the old gold that was buried underneath?
What is this a reference to?
Scooby-Doo! Because you're like a detective.
I'll level with you. I don't think we had Scooby-Doo in the Union. When I watched it as an adult, I didn't get it. So basically, it seems like Ulyssilians realized that dark sorceries are kind of powerful or intense, and you can get them by driving someone to madness type deal.
So it's not clear if, like, it's that going mad is what lets you discover abyss sorcery, or that the process of discovering abyss sorcery, which they were doing anyway because it was a society of wizards, is what sent them mad.
That's a very good point, Sophie. Thank you for bringing that up. Now, what we do know is that a toothy serpent tricked Ulyssilians to upturn the grave of primeval men. What we don't know is during which stage of these dark sorcery discoveries the serpent appeared. Like, did he show up and was the catalyst for all the dark sorceries, or did he show up later and just sort of encourage them a little bit when they were already discovering all these things?
You know, that's something that I never really wondered, is the when of when Koth showed up and the why the Ulyssilians, like, decided to go along with him. I just kind of figured it was more mischievous than that, and that he was like, hey guys, pulling a patches, like, I hear there's some treasure under this grave, and they just kind of did it, and calamity was wreaked upon them. But honestly, in the grander scheme of Dark Souls, maybe the Ulyssilians were kind of against Gwyn, perhaps, and maybe wanted a kind of power to challenge the gods. I could potentially see that working out as well. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if any of the dark sorceries were anything that they would have used before they came into contact with the corpse of Manus or not.
So Karth lives in the abyss, from what we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we encounter him in New Londo. So it's possible that, like, there was already some sort of abyss thing there because they talk about Primeval Man being buried there. So the grave of Primeval Man, like, as a location, was probably always under there. So it's probably like a little...
Yeah, that's a good point, that there might have been already been an abyss there. But for what it's worth, we also do get Frampt showing up outside of an abyss, kind of, sort of, technically, with, like, the Firelink Shrine fountain, or whatever you want to call it, the bath there. So, with that being said, yeah, I guess I wouldn't expect Koth to go out into the open.
Little tiny bit of abyss under Ulyssile, and one day a sorcerer is researching, and they hear, like... Chaosu.
So I'm wondering, and maybe this is a bit outside of the purview of just talking about Manus, Koth presents himself as having been a friend of Gwyn at some point. Do we know why they split?
Oh no, it's the other way around. It's that all the serpents were opposed to Gwyn, and then Frampt became Gwyn's friend.
Oh.
Yeah.
Kingseeker Frampt is like, he's like his fake news PR person, kind of. Like,
Basically,
oh,
yeah.
Yeah, go and
Yeah.
you have to kindle the flame, chosen undead.
Yeah.
Yeah, Koth is more in line with, like, the natural law of the world.
Yeah, we should also point out that, like, in that dark ending, there's another 10 snakes who we never meet. And
Yeah.
if they're all aligned with, like, the dark and Frampt is the outlier, then the toothy serpent that fools Ulyssile could actually have been any of them. Karth might just be, like, the new Londo one, and then there's, like, another one that's...
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point, too. Okiman, welcome in. Nice to have you again. Clash Trader Frampt.
It's a shame there's not a line where Koth is like, I see you went to Ulyssile. I remember that place.
That's actually a pretty decent accent there, or impersonation.
No, he's like, a toothy serpent. That's a name I've not heard in a long time.
It's true, he does have a lot of teeth.
No, he hears it and he's like, well, I don't know who that's referring to, because he doesn't think of himself as having a lot of teeth.
Aww.
Yeah.
He's like a bit self-deluded.
It's like, he looks in the mirror and he sees like Fabio. He's like, I'm
Yeah,
fabulous.
yeah.
They could also do like, hey, Kath, were you ever in Ulasil? And then Kath is like, there was none. And then he turns around and leaves, and it's just like, he has like a bunch of memorabilia and stuff. That's like, I came from Ulasil, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt.
Hey, Billy Caldwell, welcome in again. So, I was just wondering, what do you guys think would be like more unsettling? Koth with a bunch of like actual like snake fangs, or only 2 snake fangs, or just like the version of Koth and Frampt with a crap ton of like more flat teeth? Because I think with them having teeth the way they do is kind of even more unsettling, and does kind of potentially show a more of a kinship between like the snakes and the humans. Because snakes have fangs, not like teeth like humans do. Koth with braces? You guys want more teeth? Ew.
It's like a wish you were here Ulasil postcard.
Yeah.
He's like posing with Manus.
I don't know how that got there. But yeah, we should get back on track.
No.
No. So long story short, Ulasilians dug something up. Now there's a couple of possibilities.
Alright, so, some people think they might have dug up Manus, and the other theory is that they dug up the grave where the, like, essence of the abyss was. This is what we meant at the start when we were talking about the furtive pygmy, because it says that they upturned the grave of primeval man. The area where you fight Manus is a grave. There's like an actual like human sort of like shaped hole in the ground and everything. And Manus is a sorcerer, and if you look at all the descriptions of like the dark sorceries, it says that these were discovered by people from Ulasil who were like on the brink of going mad. And like when you go to Ulasil, everyone there is like transformed into something else because of the abyss and the humanity in them. So the takeaway from that is that Manus was a guy from Ulasil who went down into that grave area, and they were possessed by like the essence of what was in the grave, and that's what led them to become Manus, rather than Manus was always down there. The other thing is like the way that we get into there is through a jail. So there's this other theory that like back when Manus was a human and was turning into what we now know as Manus, they were locked in that prison.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of broke out through the back, and that's where we find them now.
Yeah, and part of why I thought that you have to go mad to bring up the abyss is because Manus seemed to have been in that prison. And I was thinking maybe they did something, drove him mad, and that's how the abyss was unleashed. Like, I was literally picturing the Healing Church, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong, considering Manus is just the cleric beast. No, that's something that, like, people talk about Chester as, like, oh, Chester is your Bloodborne reference. Because, like, Artorias of the Abyss and Bloodborne were being developed kind of parallel. And, obviously, like, the design of Chester is very Bloodborne. Which is, like, I don't think it's meant to be an intentional Easter egg as much as it's, like, this is what we're working on at the same time. So let's see if we can put, like, this sort of design and this kind of, like, cloth physics in Dark Souls and see how it works. Manus is the other example of that, because Manus is the cleric beast in a lot of ways, with, like, one really giant arm. The way you fight him is similar to the way you fight the cleric beast. He just has the projectiles as well.
So, does anybody remember which pendant in Dark Souls 1 was Manus' pendant? Was it the broken Ulasilian one, or was it the silver one that Artorias had? Because my understanding of the Manus thing is that the Ulasilians may have tried to grave rob him and took his pendant, which caused his humanity, his anger, to go wild and consume him, and created the kind of abyss as a byproduct of his dark emotions running wild. Darkness itself seems to go berserk if you can't control it, just like fire turns into chaos. Yeah. Chompy says the name Manus is just too on the nose for them. The connection to the demigods with the same name, who are even sometimes the first human to die, is so conspicuous. Yeah. The broken one is the silver one, just in the future? Okay. It is the broken one? Okay. That's what I thought. So yeah. Yeah. I don't know why they would have taken his broken pendant. Was the toothy serpent telling them to steal the pendant? Did the pendant have power? Because, like, when we get it, it doesn't really seem to have power, but it is curious exactly how all that came to be, isn't it?
Hey, how you doing? It's Tadetaka Miyazaki here. So, they were just talking about like the development of Bloodborne, so I thought I'd fill you all in on that. So, right after Dark Souls became a big hit, Bandai wrote to me and immediately demanded 7 sequels, and I said, fuck it, give that shit to Yui. I had to come up with my own project. And I couldn't really think of anything, and unfortunately, Eidos still owned the rights to Berserk at that point, so I didn't know what to do. So I was talking to my cousin Ricky Miyazaki, and he says to me, you know that Brotherhood of the Wolf movie? You do that, but you add the Cthulhus. So that was the genesis of Bloodborne. Dark Beast Paul is still my idea, though. Now back to these assholes.
I always theorized that the cleric beast looks like Manus as like Miyazaki's way of saying the biggest boss from the last game. Yeah, it's like the first boss in this one. Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah. Does that mean the first boss of Elden Ring will be Gale?
Ah, you'd love that.
I would.
Our favorites.
I mean, a little bit close with a grafted scion, or even almost like a Margit, but not really. This is kind of a funny idea.
Still looking for paint. Dark Souls 4, The Canvas Curse.
Did you know they used to make paint out of mummies?
Yes!
What the fuck?
Yeah, because they're all like powdery.
Yeah, artists, like painters today, they sorely miss, I think it was a red or a white they made out of them.
Yeah.
They missed that color. They also used to eat them.
Yeah.
As they had like unraveling parties, and you say this, and it's like, oh, these barbarians. No, this was like 120 years ago.
Yeah.
This is almost in living memory. You just steal some ancient great leader from Egypt, and you just eat him.
Wait, they stole them?
Yes.
Yeah.
They didn't throw a party in the pyramid?
No. No. You just went to like your New York loft with like in the swinging 20s or whenever, and they would just have an unraveling party where you just took the bandages, and it's like a mummy that's been glazed in honey for 5,000 years. Dig in.
These gender reveals are going too far nowadays.
I imagine it would have tasted pretty good, though. Not gonna lie.
And obviously the reason people who did that died shortly after was a curse.
Yes.
And not the fact that you've been hanging around a fucking tomb, eating necrotic flesh.
Hey, maybe that's what happened to Ulasil. They ate the first pygmy.
Well, that's what Gale does.
Oh, you're right.
It's coming full circle.
Oh wow. Damn.
Yeah, he ate all the old kings.
Yeah.
Damn.
Was he like, I miss those unraveling parties? Remember the 1920s?
My lady needs paint. She needs mummy white.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Aesir. So then after Lycilians dug something up, or were possessed, or tortured Manus, or drove Manus mad, they did what the toothy serpent told them to do, whatever it was. they kind of unleashed the abyss on the city.
Kind of.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
You can see it every now and then.
And what were the side effects of the abyss running wild?
Well, since side effects of the Abyss running wild include your arms becoming about 3 times as long, your fingernails becoming claws, your head swelling up into a massive weird branches and glowing red eyes,
Madness. Aggression.
yeah. Slight asymmetry with one arm becoming much bigger than the other.
Wait a minute. You get the Yarnum look.
Yes.
Oh! Yeah, kinda.
Yeah, which is another thing that kinda happens in Dark Souls 2. Because there's these, you remember, you would know this because you were Murray Kondoing No Man's Wharf, you know, those, like, kind of monkey things with the really long arms?
I turned it down. Holy crap.
I apologize. Yeah, that's right. They're here.
Turning it back up.
Yes?
They're like dark things. Like, if you hold light up, they run away.
Yeah?
Yeah, so, like, that's kind of Ulasil-like, because they have the
Oh my
long
God.
arms with the claws on the end. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Cool.
So, that was the quick summary, I guess?
40 minutes, 48 seconds.
Don't worry, most of it won't make it end.
Sophie's counting every
Now,
second.
before we proceed, Manus is a boss we fight. Could you please quickly describe what he looks like to refresh people's memories and for people who may not have seen him yet?
He's very hard to see because you fight him in almost total darkness. Yeah, he has very squat legs and a very large torso and one very large arm. And then in his other, slightly smaller arm, he's carrying a staff. His head is kind of, it looks like moose antlers. Like big, sort of like coming off the side of his head, but there's all these little red eyes in them. Which look like...
So, to just address like the whole long arm of the Ulasilians and the folk of Yarnum, it might have some relation to what's called the left-hand path and the right-hand path. So the beings in the FromSoft games typically have elongated left arms when they're like all super deformed. And so in Western esotericism, left-hand path and right-hand path are two opposing approaches to magic. This terminology is used by various groups involved in the occult and ceremonial magic. Blah, blah, blah. Some is associated with malicious black magic, while the right-hand path is equated with benevolent white magic. Other occultists have criticized this definition, saying the left-right dichotomy refers merely to different kinds of working and does not necessarily connote good or bad magical actions. So, the left-hand path is often associated with people who have rejected societal conventions and the status quo, which some suggest is in a search for spiritual freedom. As a part of this, left-hand path followers embrace magical techniques that would traditionally be viewed as taboo, for instance, using sex magic or embracing satanic imagery. As Mog Morgan wrote, the breaking of taboos makes magic more potent and can lead to reintegration and liberation. For example, the eating of meat in a vegetarian community can have the same liberating effect as anal intercourse in a sexually inhibited society. They often question religious or moral dogma, instead adhering to forms of personal anarchism, and they often embrace sexuality and incorporate it into magical ritual. So, to give this like more of a connection to Dark Souls and whatnot is, if you're delving into the dark, you could say that's against the status quo and all that. But going a step further in these games, it really tends to go along with being drowned, or not drowned, but let's say like bathed in darkness, in filth and decay and all that stuff. And the beings that do this, they do gain a lot of like supernatural powers. They kind of gain a newfound freedom by shrugging off convention and doing something else. So I think Aldrich is probably the most emblematic of this ideal here. Obviously, even though Aldrich doesn't really have a left hand to speak of, he's just kind of like the whole flaunter of convention with like consuming people, becoming like literally consumed with filth and darkness and the deep and all that. And so Manus may have been like the first instantiation of things having gone awry and his wildness from the darkness kind of infecting him to the point where his body has been transformed by the dark, which might be left-hand path adjacent. But that can also apply to Bloodborne, with like the cleric beast and Lawrence having really long left arms. Most Yarnamites will also have elongated left arms, so it's kind of been a recurring FromSoft motif for a little bit here. Dr. Angela Puka at Angela's Symposium just did vids on the left-hand path? Okay, interesting. Mo rocking the left-hand path? Yeah. Kiss, Marry, Kill Dark Souls bosses? Oof. Plastic Replica, welcome in. No, it's Kiss, Marry, Kill.
The red eyes of things that are infected with the abyss in Dark Souls. It's like a little sign that you get that there's abyss stuff going on. And you can actually see his red eyes in the darkness as you approach him. Because you approach him sort of from above, and if you look down into where you fight him, his eyes are visible glowing in there. And you can actually cheese him if you want by positioning like a crossbow or a bow there and just shooting down into the arena at the eyes. And you can actually kill him from outside the arena that way.
That's poor sportsmanship.
It's very poor sportsmanship.
I hope that in Elden Ring, they have bosses that you could theoretically do that to. But then when you do that a few times, the boss just looks at you and like throws stuff at you. And like one-shots you, either a big rock or some magic, and you're like, oh my god.
They thought of everything.
They had those bosses in Demon Souls, the dragons, where you chip them down to 1% health and then they just fuck off. It's like, wow, all this time I spent trying to kill you.
Colo asks, in my opinion, if Ulasil had not been taken by the darkness, how would they have become, considering their magic was possibly even more advanced than the Witch of Izalith herself? I don't necessarily think that their magic was more advanced. I think it was magic of a different sort. And most of the Ulasilian magic is not meant to be used in the capacity for battle at all. So, if anything, they probably would have been like good assassins and used for like the Vinheim School of Magic and all that stuff.
Amazing. So, there are various locations that are relevant to Manus. And since we in the Snack Covenant love to talk about arenas, I thought that we would frame this podcast through Manus's locations.
Okay.
First, there's a cave where he grabs us and transports us to the past. Then we'll talk about the jail. And we'll finish with the Chasm of the Abyss.
Okay.
Let's talk about the first location, where his hand takes us into the past, that is Ulasil. So can you please describe the location and tell me more about it?
Well, Sin, in Darkroot Basin, there is a Hydra.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hydra is in some water, and the water is very, very deep, and if you're playing Dark Souls Remastered, you can't see that the water's deep.
Mm-mm.
What?
Yeah, so in the original Dark Souls, the water material shader was a little different.
Oh.
So you could see through, okay, this part of the water's safe and this part's not. And then Dark Souls Remastered fixed it by making the water really, really reflective. So when the light hits the water, you can't see anything below it, and you have no idea where the safe areas are.
But you know what? They didn't fix the Hydra's terrible positioning once you've chopped up a couple of heads.
Mm.
That's still in there.
Yeah, the classics. So, when you beat the Hydra, you have to save and reload a couple of times because it like refreshes the area. You defeat the Hydra. This leads to a gold golem spawning way behind the Hydra. And inside that gold golem is Princess Dusk of Ulasil, so if you beat the gold golem, she'll pop out and say, "My hero!" And then she'll fill you in on Ulasil a bit, because like that's sort of her area, like sort of tying Darkroot to Ulasil. And then after we get the broken pendant from Seath's archives, we can go back to kind of where we found Dusk before, and a hand will come out and go, "Hey, it's my pendant!" And then we'll grab you and take you back to Ulasil.
I have a couple of questions. How long was she sitting in that golem, and how did the pendant end up with Seath?
Time is convoluted in Lordran.
No, it isn't. It's very simple.
You can sort of figure it out. Like, it happened not so long ago that the legend of Artorias has not been forgotten. It is still talked about. People know roughly where it happened. People go looking for Artorias' grave. It's a known thing. Sif is still alive, although again, Sif is like a giant magic wolf, so we don't know how long they live for. Not for much longer, sorry.
Oh.
So we have to like go find Artorias' grave. It's still roughly where like it would have been. Like the grave is still there. The sword is still there, so it's not been really that long, but it's been long enough that the exact specifics of the story have been forgotten. So no one who's alive now, apart from Dusk, was, like, there.
Yeah, we should also note, though, that it is possible that, like, the gods of Anor Londo have exacerbated, like, the speed at which Ulasil has dropped out of memory. We have that gate.
True, and there's also Elvina, but, you know, setting that one aside, Pillow was trying to say in how Ulasil's magic is used to create living plants, constructs, and even creatures like guardians, light plants, elevators, etc. Not so much combat, but in society. And because the Witch of Izalith tried to create artificial life, but the demons look all bizarre and deformed, you wonder why, or like how Ulasil would have looked had they not been consumed by darkness. It's kind of hard to say because like the whole world is still like going out of whack. Hollows would have been appearing more steadily, and it seems like there's really nothing to stop the encroachment of darkness in general. So there's only like a 300-year time gap between Ulasil and present day, allegedly, but with time being convoluted, who knows what that really means. And obviously, I've talked about this on previous streams, but the idea of time being convoluted is more along the lines of being stagnant in Japanese. So I think it's convoluted kind of gets at that idea, but unfortunately, the whole idea of stagnation and decay is more of a FromSoft specific thing, and it's part of a larger theme, so it's unfortunate that that gets a little bit lost there. But whether or not it's convoluted or like time is converging into like a single point with the fading of the flame and light being time in Dark Souls, it's questionable like how much of history is just like being lost due to time versus being lost due to things like hollows interrupting the cycle of things and like attacking everybody and kind of eroding civilization faster than it would have normally done on its own. And so, yeah, to go back to Kolo's question about like the Ulasilian sorcery versus Izalith, I think Izalith's wasn't necessarily trying to create the demon specifically. I think that's just kind of a coincidence. And she was more or less trying to reproduce the first flame, potentially to keep the age going or to create her own age. And so I don't necessarily think that Ulasilians are more powerful. I think like the Witch of Izalith just pulled a little bit of an Icarus and flew too close to the first flame as a moth. It's unclear how much of the life there was artificial on part of the Ulasilians. True. Well, to be fair, we don't really get a lot of the... well, I guess they kind of just get overgrown with roots and stuff, so it is a little bit unclear how much of that magic was done by the Ulasilians. But for what it's worth, I don't necessarily think that what the Ulasilians did is particular to them, because we do have other artificial constructs like the golems and gargoyles in like Anne Orlando and things like that. Gwyn sealed humans all the way back after they defeated the dragons, you think? If you remember from the Ring City, but that felt more like a fever dream. Yeah, it's a little bit questionable how all that really came to pass, and just the idea of the dark sign in general, whether or not it's manufactured or like passed along at birth after some of the initial humans were branded. It's a bit of a stretch. Could it be that what scared Gwyn wasn't Manus, but you yourself going back to the past? I don't necessarily know about that, because I'm pretty sure Gwyn has already sacrificed himself by the time we go back to fight Manus. But I don't exactly remember off the top of my head. Good question, though.
Gate on the opposite side of the New Londo Gate, which is just clogged up, which would lead to Ulasil, I believe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and they, because they're all about fire, they would have a vested interest in people not looking too deep into Ulasil.
That's true.
You know, I think the DLC, they kind of screwed up when they made it, because they should have given you another copy of the Covenant of Artorias if you killed Artorias before killing Sif, and then you could just not kill Sif and you could still kill the Four Kings.
Yeah, that would have been perfect.
But they didn't.
They didn't have you on their team.
Yeah, I would have made a better one.
Yeah.
You know what I would have had you able to do? I would have made Ornstein a summon for Calamite.
Oh.
That actually
That's
makes
deep.
sense.
Yeah, because all the other 3 knights are there.
That would have been cool.
Yeah.
What if Gale were summonable for Manus?
Wouldn't that be great foreshadowing if Gale was summonable? Like, who the fuck is this guy? And it's like, time is truly convoluted.
That would have been perfect.
I think that actual
It would have been really cool to just have like all of Gale's Dark Souls 3 moveset in, so he's just like moving around like frickin' Sonic, whereas we're just slow as hell in Dark Souls 1. But Chompy says, making Sif optional would have robbed us all of our shared trauma. True story. What's the kanji for it is not said? They don't typically say it like that, but it'd be like... I mean, it's not kanji, but let me just type it into chat for you. So... Toyu is, it is said, to like, Toyu anai, or Toyu anakata. It was not said. I guess you could use like that as the kanji right there, but anyway.
would have been like, okay, so like this summon that nobody knows anything about, and now he's like this big character in Dark Souls. I think that would have been actually kind of cool.
Yeah,
That would have worked. Yeah.
In order for this to work, Dark Souls 3 would need to have been planned.
Oh, shade.
No, but like it was. It just it got. Well, I mean, we're actually recording about that later tonight with Abyss. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Acer. And what is the pendant doing in Seath's archives?
It's making the accessing the DLC more annoying than it needs to be.
Okay, thank you.
Seath's obsessed with 2 things, right? He's obsessed with sorcery and
Lovely.
he's obsessed with dragons. Ulasil, Land of Sorcery. Manus, Sorcerer. Ulasil also where Calamite was killed. And where we find Dusk now, there's a Hydra. The thing about Seath is like,
He's also fascinated with maidens and humans in general, because humans have this weird connection to dragons and their scales of immortality, and that might have a larger connection with darkness as well. So crystals, dragons, magic, darkness, they're kind of all oddly interlinked, and with souls as well.
his golems are also around Darkroot Basin. He's committed to finding something in that area.
Oh.
Huh.
Yeah.
So are you saying the toothy serpent was actually Seath?
Is that what you're saying?
Is that what you're saying?
I, Nostradamus the vampire, have risen from the grave to give you a quiz. Today's quiz is: what was the most epic fight with Seath the Scaleless on this channel? Leave your comment below. For extra points, leave a link to the fight. Now back to the podcast.
Nice music there.
So one last thing. Manus's hand grabs us because we have half his pendant and transports us into the past, which is Ulasil.
Yeah.
Where does he drop us off?
Why doesn't Manus just grab the pendant by himself? What is he, stupid?
The Royal Sanctuary?
Yeah.
Will you fight the Sanctuary Guardian?
Slightly behind Royal Sanctuary.
Awesome.
Yes.
I think it's Ulasil Sanctuary. Slightly behind Ulasil Sanctuary. Gonna take this idiot seriously.
Thank you, Sophie.
The second you referred to him as Manus and not his canonical name, Manus, stop paying attention.
Thank you.
I should, maybe we should note this, just as like an addendum to, the Anorlando gods have a vested interest in people not finding this.
Yeah.
The Sanctuary Guardian was made in Ulasil, right? Because it has lightning bolt attacks. So I'm thinking, did the Anorlando gods create that so like nobody goes in there to disrupt what Artorias is doing, or?
It's also described as being kind of like a demon on its soul description. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does poison damage, doesn't it?
It's got a manticore tail, so it's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's very Seath. He just put something together. They were like,
Yeah.
Seath, we need some guardians. Like, here you go.
He just has like a lion and a scorpion lying around, and he's like,
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, we're not the only person that Manus kidnaps into the past.
No.
Marvelous Chester.
That was a statement, okay?
I was looking at you both.
It's an audio medium.
So Manus went straight into Bloodborne, grabbed poor Chester,
Mm-hmm.
brought him to Ulasil.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Do you know what my headcanon is?
What?
Chester's Carol.
Oh.
I was going to make a ridiculous about it, but then GSF came along and ruined the channel.
Yeah. Well, he's dead now, so. You know what? You know what is interesting about Chester?
What?
If Chester's been pulled from the past, it implies that, like, in the future of Dark Souls, people are wearing trench coats and top hats.
Yeah, Leonhard in Dark Souls 3 would be the closest parallel to Chester, I think, but still no top hat. Feels bad, man.
True.
And then that does end up kind of happening in Dark Souls 3.
Uh-oh.
Yes, Leonard.
Yeah, Leonard. Yeah. And he's even got the mask on, so... Canonically, Chester is one of Rosaria's fingers.
Oh my god.
Yeah. We can make sense of all the weird, like, what is blank doing in Dark Souls 3 by saying they come from Dark Souls 3, and they got pulled back into Dark Souls 1, so it's like retroactively. It's actually Dark Souls 1 that's referencing Dark Souls 3.
That's beautiful.
I know.
Yeah.
Manus is just like... He's like one of those claw prize machines. It's like a Manus claw, and he's like trying to grab like stuff he wants. It's like, oh damn it, I got Chester.
Sophie, what you're saying is Manus is the amygdala.
Yes. I mean, that is literally what happens. This giant hand grabs you and takes you back in time.
Oh
Yeah,
my
if you have the right objects on you.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, wow, yeah.
yeah.
That is interesting.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Acer. So now let's move on to the second location that's connected to Manus. The dungeon.
The dungeon.
Dun dun dun.
Could you please describe it? Tell us where we find it. Tell us a little bit about it.
Do you mean, like, just the dungeon area? Because, like, the dungeon itself's actually a pretty small part of that whole structure.
Whatever you feel like.
This is the problem when you design the structure of an episode about a place you went to once with, like, no clip on and just ran through. Like, yeah, it's the dungeon. I'm an expert. Okay, so what happens is you run through, like, Ulasil Township itself.
Which is in disarray.
It's actually, again, very similar to the Hunter's Nightmare in that, like, the city is sort of sinking into this morass, and you progress by going over the roofs of the buildings. And yeah, that leads you down into a dungeon. But the dungeon is, like, it's like one room with a bunch of cells on the side. It's not a big, complex one like Lost Bastille from Dark Souls 2. It's kind of like the one from Bloodborne, actually, where it's just basically that is just a hall with some cells.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit bigger than that, and there is a chain person in the middle, and they're not happy.
No.
No.
What is that guy about?
It's a very good question.
Answer it.
Presumably, they're just like a prisoner that was... They're a prisoner that's turning into something, and they chained them up.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it's like the pus of man was exploding from them, and they just like,
Yeah.
we must contain this transformation.
That's what we'll say.
Oh,
I think the actual answer is like that was like an enemy.
Did you
that
just
they
kill
deleted
yourself
from
and
the
is he
base
gonna
game, and
fall?
like, yeah, we'll use it here. It's a prisoner.
Miyazaki-san, what
just
are you doing
latency,
here?
okay.
Hey, hello! How you doing?
Okay, so I think I can't exactly... I don't know 100%, but like, I think that enemy is like something from that they cut from the base game, and then they sort of recycled by having, oh, it's a mutated prisoner.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And how is this area related to Manus?
assumably Manus, the dude. See, we talked earlier about what exactly they dug up. If we assume that they were torturing him, then there's some interesting implications. First, in that there's a bonfire in his cell. So if they accidentally kill him in torture, he'll just respawn there. Really convenient.
Oh my god, that's so horrible.
But see, that I don't know if that's lore or if that's just, no, we put a bonfire there because we needed a bonfire.
God, I love that lore.
Were undead around then?
Well, I mean, there are bonfires around. I don't know,
Yeah.
like, when we get into Ulasil in
Yeah.
the flashback, that doesn't, like, that's maybe, like, how long ago has this been going on? So,
Yeah.
like, they have bonfires at that point.
Hmm.
Also, you talked earlier about Chester being one of Rosaria's fingers.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't serious.
No,
No,
but
we're serious.
I know. What does Rosaria want?
Tongues.
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 Hey, what did they cut out of Griffith in Berserk?
Well, a lot of things actually, but also his tongue.
Not
And
wrong.
his tongue. And what does Griffith and Manus, if Manus is a prisoner, have in common? The pendant.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I lean on the idea that he was like a prisoner there, because I think it makes sense that Miyazaki's like, oh, I need like a dark story for this guy. I know, I'll just do Griffith.
Let me get out my copies of Berserk. Oh, that's a good one.
Let me just brainstorm. Reaches over to his bookshelf. Oh, my only manga.
I feel like people always kind of exaggerate Berserk's influence, but I think that one is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well, he was probably like a sorcerer that he was started to transform, so they locked him in the prison because he was going mad and changing. And
Yeah, my interpretation of Manus is that he does predate the Ulasilian society, especially if he is supposed to be quote-unquote primeval man, because Ulasil technically happens pretty late in the timeline, only being like 300 years before the events of the game, and the Witch of Izalith is said to have like committed her sin 1,000 years ago, although to be fair, that could just be like figurative language on the part of the Japanese there. So that's at least 700 years after the birth of the Chaos Flame, and the conflict with Gwyn and his Black Knights fighting the demons probably happened between the time of between the time of Izalith and Ulasil. So yeah, I don't know. The big thing that does bother me about Ulasil is how it talks about how a pyromancer goes back there to like get flame sorceries, when Quailana says that she taught Salaman only 200 years ago, whereas this happened 300 years ago, so a full 100 years before Quailana's student. But as they say, time is convoluted. Also, Mikkel is 1,000% Griffith all over again. A Berserk reference in Dark Souls? I know, right? Who could believe it? Welcome back to the stream, Nectarine.
That's not very nice.
No. And also his pendant was the only thing that kept him sane.
Yeah.
They just took it away from him or something.
Yeah, you know who else turns into a monster and has a pendant?
Who?
Lawrence?
Lawrence?
No. Do you think Shura awoke within Manus?
Yes.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Acer. Now, one last question. By which mechanism did the abyss spread in Ulasil?
Well, Sen, according to you, the abyss is airborne.
That's going way back.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody knows this reference.
No one made it. I think they probably remember when it was uploaded, but they didn't make it that far in. Hi, Sophie here. The Abyss being airborne is a reference to a video that Sin and I made several years ago in collaboration with fellow influencer Aegon of Astora. The Abyss is described as something without a set form that moves from place to place, twisting the world around it. This makes perfect sense within the fantasy universe of Dark Souls, unless you're Sin, who demanded a purely physical explanation. When Aegon and myself failed to provide one, because there isn't one, Sin decided that the Abyss must be airborne, a sinister, invisible cloud moving around Lordran, Dranglake, maybe Lothric.
It's simply Nito's miasma of death and destruction, right? Yeah.
And wherever the ringed city is, and making bits of the ground melt. Yet another good reason to wear a fitted mask when out in public. Back to the podcast.
I look forward to seeing how much of this podcast survives.
Honestly, surprisingly, a lot of it will.
Now, let's talk about the last area and the boss fight. The Chasm of the Abyss.
We didn't even talk about the dungeon.
Oh!
We just got sidetracked.
So, if anybody has anything else to add about the dungeon, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Sin, I've been meaning to say.
Hey, Sophie, you look like you've got something to say. Do you?
I certainly do, Asa, thank you. So, the reason that we're bringing up the dungeon is that one of the cells is what leads to the Chasm of the Abyss, which is the next area. Which makes it seem like, okay, was Manus in that cell? And then, when he turned into Manus the monster, he like broke out the back of the cell and sort of dragged himself to the abyss that way.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Acer. Now, let's move on to the last part. The Chasm of the Abyss. Can you please describe it?
Dark.
Dingy.
It's kind of like a less annoying Tomb of the Giants.
Right?
It's dark, but not so dark that you will fall off cliffs if you don't bring a light source with you.
There's also no enemies who are flailing around wildly with bad hitboxes trying to kick you off ledges.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, how is the Chasm of the Abyss related to Manus?
He's in it.
Yeah, it's his house. Okay, so like talking about the abyss moving around kind of, like the chasm of the abyss itself is probably not like the abyss, it's more like an excavation site where they were digging up the grave of primeval man. So digging. We go to the abyss in the base game, and it's the area under New Londo. And if we go there without the Covenant, we die instantly. So the fact we can wander around the Chasm of the Abyss without the Covenant, it's not the Abyss, it's just like a place.
Abyss adjacent.
It's Abyss adjacent, yeah. So like, Ulysses.
Can you actually get here without the Covenant of Artorias? Let me think about that. Yeah, because you could get sucked in by Dusk. Yeah, I guess you don't need to do that section of the quest line. Okay.
We're like digging. It's actually very like Bloodborne Chalice dungeony. And they were like excavating this sort of weird tomb. And that's what the chasm is. It's like where they were digging, basically. So it's a series of like caves. There's little prism stones left there, presumably by like people who'd been there before to mark the way. Also kind of like Tomb of the Giants. And yeah, it's full of humanity sprites, which are like basically the humanity icon from Dark Souls with a face that chases you. And I'm trying to think if there's other stuff down there. It's not actually very... It's one of those areas that like Dark Souls does a lot where you remember it being absolutely massive, but it's not. It's just very intricate in its design, so you're there for a long time. So it seems like it's very, very large, and then when you actually step back, you're like, oh, this is actually like 2 minutes long. You can just jog through it. Sif is there, and Alvina is there.
Yeah. Quickly on the Abyss moving, it moved just over one bridge straight into New Londo. So it's possible that Koth is the one from Ulasil. He's just like,
yeah,
I kind of screwed up this place. Just moved right on over.
Well, did he screw it up? Because I think he got what he wanted.
Well, yeah, it's possible.
Because like the whole thing about Koth is he's trying to get like the Lord of Dark to be born, and Manus is the closest we get for a while. So like Manus is like basically what happens to us, where he's like, oh, seek dark.
Well, with Koth being really disappointed with the Dark Wraiths and the four lords of New Londo, it does make me doubt that he like really had any modicum of success for quite a long time there.
So like Manus is probably quite happy with Manus, honestly. Yeah. Just that this is in the past, so I'm assuming like Manus didn't work out in the play. Maybe someone, I guess we kill him.
Yeah.
Maybe Koth is creating a time loop where we kill the Lord of Dark, absorb their soul, get all the dark into us, then someone goes and kills us, and then they get it. It just goes around and around infinitely until like you reach critical dark mass.
Are you telling me that we are the original Soul of Cinder, but the Soul of Dark?
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mind blown.
Yeah. I don't actually think that. Don't leave comments. I mean, okay, there's us, there's Manus, and there's Gale. And Lothric. So, of the four, we're doing pretty good.
Yeah. And Koth is associated with all of us except Gale? Because Koth was supposed to be in Dark Souls 3.
Okay, so like we don't know for certain if Koth was supposed to be in it as a character, but we do know that like there's references to Koth existing in it.
Yeah, and wasn't he like the mentor of the Lothric boy?
Well, okay. let's step back a bit. Okay. If you're me, right, you think Karth was the tutor that they talk about, the scholar? Because it's like, what's Karth's MO? Karth's MO is he goes around finding kingdoms, and then he shows up and he's like, "Psst, kid, maybe you want to go, this dark stuff's pretty good." And he's like getting them to basically like, hey, go mess with this dark stuff and see what happens. It's what he does to Ulsil, it's what he does to New Londo. So then when you hear about, oh, Lothric, this like really advanced kingdom, and suddenly the leaders of the kingdom got really obsessed with this dark stuff because a mysterious scholar was saying like, hey, maybe you want to look into this a little more, which is what Karth would do. So I think, and I still think honestly, that like, in a roundabout way, because Dark Souls 3 is like hacked up and rewritten so many times, that like the tutor, the scholar, was probably Karth. Either Karth or like an emissary of Karth, like someone who's working for Karth, like a Yuria sort of character.
So I think that scholar that Sophie's referring to here is supposed to have been Aldia, because it's the first of the scholars, which is kind of like the first scholar of the first sin, essentially is what they're going for. Because you get Soul Geyser, which is like an heirloom of the Aldian family or whatever they call it in Dark Souls 2. So, setting that aside, Koth did interact with the folk of Londor, because when you kill Yuria, she says for Koth to forgive her and that like his dying will ... So she's saying like she was unable to fulfill his will, his like dying wishes. So Koth is no more by the time of Dark Souls 3, but his legacy lives on with Londor. And we don't necessarily know if Yuria and the Sable Church were actually truly following Koth's wishes, or if they believed they were following Koth's wishes, but kind of deviating from it unknowingly, which isn't, you know, the biggest of deals here, but I think it's just kind of like worth mentioning. So, is the Dark Lord supposed to be the Lord of Hollows, or is the Dark Lord supposed to be one who just chooses not to link the flame? All of this stuff is very arguable because, at least in the times of Dark Souls 1, the chosen undead is kind of unable to fulfill that role of the Lord of Hollows, and I do think that's supposed to be more of a Ashen One exclusive thing, because the Ashen Ones are described as being flameless or fireless ash in Japanese, which means like they cannot hold fire within them. And I've wondered whether or not the reason they can usurp the flame is because they're like fundamentally incompatible with it, and therefore like the flame cannot burn them because they're already ash. But we're never really given truly explicit answers about that. I have also wondered whether or not, since the Ashen One is ash, and the Ashen Estus Flask turns the heat of an Estus Flask into cold, whether or not something similar goes on with like the Lord of Hollows and all that. Yeah, but the serpent statues in Lothric Castle indicate a great deal of contact. True, and we also get a lot of the serpent statues in the Ringed City as well, so I think it's a little bit of both, where Koth may have had a role, but I do think that the person with whom Lothric interacted with was canonically supposed to be Aldia, which is weird because, like, what the hell happened to Aldia? You know, we just get those kind of oblique references and then nothing else, which is a little bit unfortunate, but leads us to talking more about the lore. Make longer whole again.
But then, like, other people think it's Aldia and other people think it's Sullivan, so like it never specifies. It never says.
I don't think it could make sense being Aldia. Number one, because we kill him, but but also because that's not Aldia's deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Aldia's deal is all about like
find something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't really kill Aldia because like after he dies, he keeps talking to us. This is the most narratively pointless fight in the series, where it's like.
But that speech he gives at the end is so good. Where he's like, there is no path.
He could have given you the speech without fighting you beforehand.
Yeah, it's like, it's also a goofy fight. It's just a big face.
Yeah. He's a big face and he has little tentacles that go... and then he does his fireball thing with two little tentacles come up and he goes...
Well, he's a scholar. He's doing his best, okay?
I relate. If you had to fight me, it'd probably be quite like that. Just my hair is just like going... And then I can't open the door.
For what it's worth, Aldia isn't necessarily saying to embrace the dark. He does want a path that is different from leaving the flame or embracing it. So with him talking about that, I can see there being a connection to like the Lord of Hollows ending. Him telling Lothric to abandon linking the flame would still kind of go along with like the Lord of Hollows ending, but for what it's worth, he wanted to transcend the cycle of light and dark by making it so that humans could remain immortal in their human forms without going hollow, which is kind of impossible, which is like all of what Dark Souls 2 is about. And anyway, the main point that I want to make about Aldia is that I think with him being the scholar of the first sin and him studying life, he's more or less supposed to be like the scholar of life itself. And so, yeah, I don't exactly know why they made the reference to like the first of the scholars in Dark Souls 3 when there's no other real references to Aldia, and it's not as though like the younger Lothric really respects Aldia's wishes and does something else. Like he already linked the flame, and now he's like, oh man, linking the flame, I done goofed, you know? Took that L, gotta stop others from taking that L too, but yeah. Don't bully me, bro. Everyone makes mistakes. Nah. That was a purpose. The purpose is to learn.
One of Sin's favorite facts about me.
It's true.
Would Sin be like fighting Gale, where you're like, you meet her and she's like eating some snacks or something?
Alright, 2 days ago, Sin called me and then she wasn't on camera and I'm sitting like, I don't know where you are. And she wanders in like this monster like from the other side of the camera and she's just got this giant hunk of meat. And she's just like, yes, bitch. And I'm sitting there with my scented candles in a little china cup and it's like, oh, the contrast has never been more defined.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
But so yeah, the Abyss. Chasm of the Abyss.
Yeah.
There's
I am disappointed you guys didn't make a snack covenant reference there with them talking about providing snacks.
a hole there. There's a
Yeah,
man-shaped hole.
Yes.
A manhole.
Yeah, okay. Also point out that, like, another example of, like, what is and is not the Abyss is the Dark Chasm of Old in Dark Souls 2, which is kind of implied to be, again, like, Abyss adjacent. It's a similar place to the Dark Chasm of the Abyss, in that it's a dark chasm, and you progress by falling through holes in the ground. It's very sort of weirdly dreamlike, like you just run to the end of corridors and fall through, and then you're just somewhere else. And it sort of has no real geography to it. Like, there's no Covenant of Artorias, obviously, in 2, and it just sort of goes on, and the final boss is like a sort of embodiment of Dark, called the Dark Lurker, which, like, isn't Manus. But it's getting there, like, and, like, Manus looms large over 2, even though Manus himself doesn't show up, so...
And people complain that like Dark Souls 3 doesn't draw enough from the previous games, where I feel like Dark Souls 2 is way worse in that regard.
When we were talking about Manus' crypt, I called that part of my notes the Manus Crypt manuscript.
Is there anything else anybody would like to add?
Well, Sin, Sif and Alvina are both in the Chasm of the Abyss.
What are they doing there?
Nothing. Sif is hiding.
Oh,
Sif is hiding because, like, presumably that's when Artorias, like, went to the chasm. So that that actually gives you an interesting timescale, because, like, Sif in the chasm is very small in comparison to when we fight her. So Sif is like a puppy, basically, when Artorias takes her to the Abyss.
yeah.
And then,
Wait a minute, Sophie.
What? Yeah.
So now you're getting me to think, why would Artorias take a puppy into the abyss?
It's a very big puppy. It's a puppy version of a giant wolf.
But it's still a puppy. I don't care how big Corvo is. I'm never taking him to the abyss.
It was a Baby Yoda situation.
Yeah,
It was a
also
baby Sith.
the puppy can, kill Manus for you.
How?
You can summon Sif for the Manus fight.
Oh, that's neat.
This is what happens when you skip the DLC. You completely skip it and then you're like, let's make a podcast about it. Oh, what?
Did you play the Dark Souls 2 DLCs?
I only play the true Dark Souls 2, which is Scholar of the First Sin.
That has
Yes.
the DLCs in it.
I don't know which thing is the DLC. I just play everything.
Okay, good.
I'm so glad we decided to do this DLC series.
Yeah, you are doing a series on the DLCs of Dark Souls 2 on the basis of the channel. You are still on No Man's Wharf.
What is Alvina doing there?
Alvina is there to lead you to Sif.
Okay. I
Yeah.
thought she was just like trolling us, being a dick.
She's just distracting you over here.
Yeah, no, if you do follow Alvina, she does kind of lead you towards Sif.
I did it for the lols.
Yeah, so Alvina's whole thing, in the present, is she's protecting Sif. So if you talk to her, she's like, "Oh, Taurus, never heard of him. There's nothing to hear." And the whole Forest Hunter Covenant is like, "Hey, get out of my garden.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of here, because you don't want to mess with Sif, you don't want to mess with Artorias." So Alvina's, in the past doing the same thing. She's like, if you want to rescue Sif, Sif is through here. Because Sif is hidden behind an illusory wall and surrounded by humanity sprites.
Yeah.
So it's the whole thing with Artorias is Artorias, when he went there to begin with, he had a sword and a shield. And the arm that had the shield, he was blocking the abyss with it and it crippled his arm, and that's why when you fight him he's only got the one working arm. And I think this is one of those things that goes back and forth a lot. I think the implication is Artorias is actually, he's fighting you with his sword in his offhand. He was actually left-handed. And he's fighting you with the sword in his right hand because his other arm got crippled by using the shield. I can't remember.
So I wonder if you got any hate comments about the majestic greatsword of Dark Souls 2, saying that all of the wielders of it were left-handed, based off of those comments right there. So yeah, it is possible that Artorias was left-handed and he had his shield initially in his right, or obviously the opposite, in that the shield was in his left hand that he was using to protect Sif, and he got injured and all that stuff.
It's based on a shot of him walking backwards that's cover art, so I don't know how to take it. So if you follow Alvina around the Chasm of the Abyss, she will lead you to an illusory wall behind which is Sif. Sif is being protected by presumably the barrier that Artorias put around Sif. If you defeat the humanity sprites outside the barrier, Sif is rescued and you can summon Sif to fight Manus.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
What was Manus like before we encounter him in the boss fight?
He was a sorcerer, presumably. So we compared Manus to the cleric beast, and we compared the prison area to kind of the healing church prison. But it's very similar because it's oh, we're a bunch of scholars and we went underground and we found this weird stuff and started researching it and it turned us into monsters. Except in Bloodborne it's blood, and in Dark Souls it's humanity, and then in Dark Souls 3 it's the blood of humanity.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Acer.
Thank you, Sin.
Now, Sophie, you prepared something for us from Manus's #1 fan.
Yes, so Acer doesn't know who Bubble is, and I think a lot of people listening probably don't know who Bubble is, so I'll just paste some images of Bubble in the Discord, so I have permission to use these in the podcast. So this is Bubble. She's wearing her Manus shirt.
Oh my goodness.
And you might think, oh, she really likes Manus. No. Behold. This is Bubble's bespoke Manus body pillow.
What the hell?
She had this specially made so that every night she can cuddle with Manus. Here's some artwork.
Didn't she learn that we shouldn't mess with Manus to let him be?
artwork of Bobble, drawn by her friend Ham. So, Bobble is a friend of mine, and she hangs around the chat sometimes. And so when I heard we were doing Manus, I had to ask her, how do you feel about Manus? Here's her response. Manus, tragic backstory that is easily forgotten, hot monster, and canonically has children. He's named Master of the Abyss in Japanese, but I think Father of the Abyss is better because he's the source of the Abyss, unlike the Four Kings who just created a pool of Abyss by causing too much humanity. The Abyss came from within him, which is hot, that's why he's the daddy.
It's lukewarm.
He is technically right, it is lukewarm.
Which if Izalith had a Lord Soul powerful enough to turn everyone into demons, Manus had the ability to turn everyone into eldritch creatures. Also, when he does his dark sorcery moves, he is so handsome. All those hoes and simps thirst over Artorias' sloppy moves, but he's nothing but a dying man flailing his arms uselessly. But Manus is at his most powerful, handsome, majestic, amazing, and cool. He's good at melee and sorcery, and has the thickest health bar in the game, 6666. Well sculpted and gorgeous, he is a work of art.
Man, it's clearly not a dog man, 0 out of 10.
That was beautiful poetry.
Thank you.
You know what? Bubble, you're not the weirdest person I've met in this FromSoft community.
Yeah, well, that is a very high or a very, very low bar, depending on how you want to look at that. Not Bubble, but what Acer just
Bubble.
said, the weirdest person in the community.
Here's some Artorias and Manus shipping art that I've got from her. And finally, here's Manus if Manus had to work at a maid cafe.
Thank you, Bubble.
Yes, thank you, Bubble, for sharing these with me, because she has these commissioned for her, and it was very nice of her to let us use them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're almost done, Acer.
So, it's a good podcast when you have to reassure the guest that it's almost over.
Now, let's move on to the last part of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
On Discord, we asked people to share their Manus theories with us.
We're gonna say if they're hot or not.
Or
Okay.
lukewarm.
Okay.
So who wants to read out the first theory?
I will.
Okay, and when you read it, you have to read the name of the person and then...
That's not a real name, but I'll read it anyway. Armaria Nan sent Manus looks like a demon because the chaos flame is kindled by humanity. The fair lady feeds off of humanity. So the chaos flame transforms people into Manus-like beings because it makes their humanity go wild. So chaos is basically a fiery abyss.
That's hot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my take on Chaos is that it's a little bit different in that it just uses whatever the hell it can for its fuel, whether it be humanity or souls or miscellaneous fuel.
So Colin with 2 L's says, I kind of think whatever made the Titanite demons based them on Manus. They both have staves, and the statue walking with the broken leg gives them a similar walk. They both have tails, and the half circles on the Titanite demon's back could be an artistic interpretation of the eye antlers that Manus has. So that's our second Manus demon thing, yeah.
I think this is a fine theory.
That's a great theory, Colin. Don't listen to Acer.
Matoma 1A wrote, I think that Manus and Ulasil served as an inspiration to Seath. The Abyss and humanity in general seems capable of transforming people, and Seath eventually starting experimenting on humans, transforming them into other beings. I think Seath was trying to replicate the metamorphosis he either heard about or observed in Ulasil, so that he could transform himself. So he began testing this phenomenon on humans. This theory provides a secondary explanation on why Seath has his minions in Darkroot Garden, if he was trying to procure everything relating to Ulasil that he could. After all, crystal golems can be observed obtaining items and people from Ulasil and bringing them back to the Duke's archives. Furthermore, this could explain why Priscilla has ties to the dark with her occult dagger. And if the experiment that created her was based on trying to utilize and manipulate the dark and dragon genetics.
Thank you for that theory, Matoma. It's very good.
DoomKitty3000 says, if you shuffle Manus's name, you get Samsung without a G. Coincidence?
No. I think that was intentional.
Nah, it's got to be a coincidence because Samsung means 3 diamonds in Korean, and Manus has 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, right, AC, you want to read the next one?
Manus also means hand.
Yeah, so, and then DoomKitty points out, mobile phones are also called handy phones.
It all fits.
It all makes sense.
Thank you, Arky and DoomKitty, for making this theory come together.
And you see, hand phone in Korean is 휴대폰, so that means Manus.
Yeah. Always on their damn phone. It's like a terrible, boomer cartoon. Manus has one giant hand because he's always on his phone.
I think Sin should read I think you should read the final one.
Okay. Our divinator Arky says, well, we know that Manus was killed so hard that his animus exploded into a bunch of waifus. Sophie, do the outro.
That was the Snack Covenant episode 261, Queens of Dark Souls 2, episode 0, Manus.
Thank you. And we had a very special guest on with us.
Hi.
Hey, sir, if people want to find you on social media, where should they look for you?
You can find me on YouTube, AesirAesthetics. We talked about this in the beginning. But you can also find me on Twitter. I have the hottest gamer memes.
You did a tweet where you were offering Dark Souls facts and too many people liked that.
No, it was Bloodborne facts.
Bloodborne facts, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, I have 15 in the bag. It's like at 53. And I know that's not like the biggest tweet in the world or anything, but 53 facts just from the top of your head, that's hard. You would never understand my pain.
Yeah.
Sophie, did you know that the Dark Souls, it's actually written in English first?
It's written in Jersey first, and then that's translated into, so only the Jersey dub is canon.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
Thank you, Acer.
Thank you, Sin.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Joke's on Sin. The premiere's already over. Oh. Alright, without horns, you have a good night. And thanks for stopping by. Alright, so this is another video by Sin, who is in chat. Thank you so much for joining us during this. I'm going to go ahead and like it and share it with you guys as well. If you want to give them a like, feel free. Honestly, I do wish these videos were sped up a little bit. It does seem like there's a little bit of a dead time, so I'd like to be a little bit more focused, but obviously that's just me. And you guys certainly have a sizable fan base who appreciates the format. All right, but once again, thank you for the video. I enjoyed it. There were some interesting comments there about Manus and his lukewarmness, as well as other things like related to Ulasil. I will need to think more about like the timeline with the toothy serpent deceiving the Ulasilians and kind of creating the genesis of the abyss with Manus, and like why would the Ulasilians have even like really wanted to do it in the first place? Because I don't know why I never really thought about it, but I just kind of didn't. I just took it for granted. Watch that twice the speed? Yeah. I typically do on my own. I pretty much watch everything at double speed. But obviously with stream and not everyone's first language being English, I do like to be courteous and put things at 1 time speed. So that way, if they watch my streams at 2 times speed, they're not listening to you guys at 4 times speed. All right. But anyway, thank you for the video. Now we will be moving on to the winner of the like $10,000 lore prize thing video by Nerdy Inc. Their Dark Souls story biography of the Chosen Undead. So this one's a very short video, about 5 minutes long. I'm curious as to what made them win. All right, here we go.
We now return to Biography of the Chosen Undead, the Dark Souls story. Dragons hold dominion over all.
How old is this video? 7 years ago, February 8th, 2016.
The lighting of the first flame brings light and shadow, plunging the world into disparity. From it, the 4 Lord Souls are born. Overthrowing the dragons, these godlike beings brought about the Age of Fire. But the flame could not last forever. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, took it upon himself to venture to the kiln of the first flame and sacrificed himself to rekindle it.
The background music is slightly loud. I'll turn it down ever so slightly for you guys to get it more in line with Sin's video, so that should be slightly better.
Jace Goodley is a professor and historian at
now the music
Manolondo
changes.
University, where he's spent the last 20 years trying to piece together the life of the Chosen Undead. The Chosen Undead was afflicted with the Dark Sign, a curse that drove men insane until they became hollow. He somehow came to Lordran, where he then collected the 4 Lord Souls. The Chosen Undead's task would not have been easy. What little evidence historians have uncovered reveals giant beasts, felled dragons, and slain bodies of knights who would have posed a challenge on their journey. But not all historians agree. Archaeologist Bartholomew Underhill, who specializes in relics from the Age of Fire, has his own theory on the Chosen Undead's story.
He didn't do it alone. He didn't. There are numerous soapstone engravings still remarkably preserved at many important archaeological sites, and they're calls for help.
Absolutely not. There is no concrete evidence these engravings were anything more than juvenile graffiti. Regardless, the Chosen Undead brought the souls to the kiln of the first flame and rekindled the fire, sacrificing himself in the process. Restarting the fire would create a new cycle of light and dark, but many scholars also disagree on the exact events that transpired within the kiln.
It is entirely possible that he defeated Gwyn, let the flame die out, and then brought about the resurgence of what we historians now call the Abyss.
The Abyss, created by Manus, the furtive pygmy himself, and wielder of the Dark Soul. The Abyss threatened to swallow...
I guess since this video won the 10,000 prize, we do have confirmation that Manus is the furtive pygmy? Question mark.
The entire land. Legend states that Gwyn sent his faithful knight Artorius to combat the darkness. Yet it wasn't Artorius. We know he was corrupted by the darkness. Many believe, as I do, it was the Chosen Undead who defeated Manus, vanquished the Abyss, and put Artorius out of his misery. It's tragic.
The idea that it was the Chosen Undead who also fought back the Abyss is a fringe theory propagated on ancient myth. The events surrounding Manus and Artorius happened aeons before the Chosen Undead entered the picture. To believe they had any part in this whatsoever, you'd have to subscribe to the theory that they are some time-traveling being.
After the Abyss was...
I do like the little bit of the interplay between the quote-unquote experts disagreeing with each other, very in line with Dark Souls. I do wish there was like more disagreement about like the soapstone signs that like they requested help, they didn't request help, all that kind of stuff. But I like the little disagreements here.
Was driven back. Many historians agree that a remnant of Manus was splintered, flown across space and time, only to reappear many years later in a land known as Drangleic. The next time the Chosen Undead appears is much, much later. Many don't believe it's the same person at all. What we know for sure is that they sought out a cure for a similar curse.
Drangleic has very tenuous connections, if any, to Lordran. What we do know is that King Vendrick was tricked by his queen Nashandra into waging a fateful war against the giants across the sea.
Vendrick, upon realizing he was tricked by Nashandra, locked himself away in the Undead Crypt. Now, the Chosen Undead, whoever they are at this point, discovered that Nashandra is actually a splinter of Manus.
Speculated. It is speculated that Nashandra was born of a shard of Manus, father of the Abyss.
That sounds too much like a streamer I know. I don't like that.
They defeat Nashandra, then link the fire, restarting a new age of light.
Or, more than likely, the Chosen Undead collected the 3 crowns of Lords long past, which, when combined with Vendrick's own crown, made him immune to the curse, effectively breaking it. He then lets the fire die out. The end.
You see, it's a cycle. The fire is lit, the fire begins to die out, and the curse starts anew, and then the fire is rekindled. It's beautiful. Is the story of the light of the first flame and the chosen undead one of death and rebirth? Or is there an unwritten chapter that historians have yet to uncover?
There's so much we don't know. We could be missing an entire age buried underneath our feet that would redefine everything we know about the Chosen Undead and the light of the first flame.
Unless more light is shed on this mystery, the Chosen Undead story will remain shrouded in darkness.
All right, yeah, I can see why that would win, especially if this came out between the times of, let's see what time, 2016? Oh yeah, so like 1 month before Dark Souls 3 came out. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially with like being able to simultaneously hold multiple positions. I think is a smart way to frame their kinds of arguments. So I can respect why they may have won. But to be fair, I also haven't seen like all of their competition. But yeah, I think that's pretty good, especially for it being only like 5 minutes long. So Vati is the top comment. This is the best. You did a great job. Well, I guess when you get a kind of endorsement like that, the Bife of Dark Souls. All right. Here is the link for that video. It's a pretty good one. I liked it. Nerdy Inc. I wonder what else they have going on in that channel. Thanks. Oh, it doesn't look like... Oh, that's just popular videos. Okay. It looks like they haven't uploaded in a bit. That's unfortunate. So yeah, I enjoyed that one. All right. So with that being said, tomorrow I actually have like the schedule set up for the next couple days. We will look at Visceral Femininity, a Bloodborne video essay, and then the Bloodborne Iceberg Fully Explained. I think we looked at the Dark Souls one, but we haven't looked at a Bloodborne one, so I figured that'd be a kind of good, light-hearted topic to maybe go after a little bit of a heavier one. And then on Thursday, I'm thinking of looking at Crunchy's latest video on Elden Ring and the structure of reality. So those are the plans for the next 2 days, and then what comes after that is a big old question mark. Vati commented on a video Sin did once, and then she made Vati do a night for the podcast about Reborn. The streams are the best. Thank you very much. He came on for Reborn and didn't get stuck in traffic. Yeah. All right, everybody. So that'll be it for me for tonight. Once again, thank you all for joining me. I appreciate that very much. Whether or not you're just chatting or lurking, they're all good to me. So hopefully we'll catch you on the next stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Till then, stay safe, take care, and good night. Last Protagonist out.